This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to the Middle East, to the Gaza Strip, and to the question of why I can't really excuse myself from this question, why we are not talking about it more. It's a funny one, isn't it? And I don't know the answer, but we will talk about it today. And can I tell you two things? I'm not asking you to get your violins out or anything like that, but I exist in a curious space between people who say the reason why you're not talking about it is because you're not allowed to, or you've been silenced, or you have been censored, which is part, of course, of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And then if I do talk about it, I routinely get accused of anti-Semitism for committing the crime of relaying some unchallenged facts about what is currently happening. For example, the fact that all humanitarian aid has been cut off, the fact that the remaining trickle of electricity into the Strip was cut off at the weekend, the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to move the goalposts agreed in January's ceasefire, and the fact that the United Nations reports today that it has found evidence of genocidal acts carried out against Palestinians by way of systematically destroying women's healthcare facilities and using sexual violence as a war strategy. The facts are that is what the United Nations say that they have found in a report published this morning. Israel's permanent mission to the UN has described the allegations in the report as unfounded, biased and lacking credibility. But who is allowed to investigate events in Gaza? Who actually is afforded even the thinnest veil of objectivity by the Israeli government? Who is allowed to report? Journalists aren't allowed in. Anybody who gets in and reports back is attacked as biased and up to and including United Nations experts. So why? I don't know. I do know that the coverage given to the BBC's extraordinary faux pas, for want of a much stronger word, by not establishing every branch of the family tree of a teenage boy who presented a documentary for them, and had they tried to do so, they'd have established pretty quickly that his father worked as a civil servant in the government in Gaza, which means he is a member of Hamas. I don't think you can hold a role in the government without being a member of Hamas, and Hamas is a terrorist organization. So the coverage given to that story felt at times almost all-encompassing. It felt like the biggest story in the world at times. I didn't join in because I didn't see any evidence or anybody claiming that what was in the actual documentary was under dispute or was questionable. And of course, you return once again to the fact that you can't send journalists into Gaza. So you are left having to rely on people already there. And if you have links to the government or a role in government, you will be a de facto member of Hamas. And Hamas, on October the 7th, committed an atrocity of such unspeakable awfulness that it will be remembered for generations. You don't get to pretend otherwise. You might be able to indulge in some sort of Sinn Féin IRA type conflation and point out that just because you're a member of the political wing of a movement doesn't mean that you're party to the terrorist violence. But I don't really buy that. I think that if the cap fits, you wear it. But why would you give more coverage to the family tree of a documentary presenter on the BBC than you do to the fact that all humanitarian aid into one of the most benighted corners of the globe has been ended, has been halted? That the remaining, you don't get much electricity into Gaza. Most of the people there use diesel generators. The electricity that does make its way in there is largely used up by desalination plants, so that there is some drinking water. There is a threat in place already that they'll cut off the supply of water that goes into the Gaza Strip. You know, and I know, that you're not supposed to indulge in collective punishment. It defies the Geneva Convention, and no doubt somebody will be able to make a case that punishing 2.2 million people for the actions of October the 7th is not collective punishment, but it looks like collective punishment to me. And some members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government have been pretty clear about their support for collective punishment. We know, don't we, that when the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his Minister Gallant back in November, it was for crimes against humanity and war crimes. Warrants also issued for Hamas leaders, but in the case of the Israeli politicians, it stated that there were reasonable grounds to believe that both men were responsible for using starvation as a method of warfare. It could be weeks now before Gaza runs out of fresh food and the fuel needed to power the generators I just told you about and pump the water from the remaining wells undamaged by the conflict. And the other story that perhaps didn't get as much coverage as you might have expected saw Israel vote with Russia at the United Nations to actually vote against a motion condemning Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. Are you beginning to form an answer now to the question of why people don't seem to be talking about it anymore? Because you can't, can you, without concluding that what is going on is both indefensible and unprecedented. Israel voted with Russia. Israel, which rightly called upon the sympathy of the world after the horrors of October the 7th, voted with the aggressor at the United Nations, with the illegal invader of Ukraine, in refusing to condemn Russia's illegal invasion. The first time, I think, that Israel has done so. So how do you talk about it? It's easy to talk about a teenage boy whose dad should have excluded him from consideration for a job presenting a documentary on the BBC, despite the fact that you can't get any journalists into Gaza to do the job, should we say, more professionally. I can see how you can get your knickers in a right old twist about that, especially if you hate the BBC. But all of those things, up to and including Israel's vote with Russia against Ukraine. Now, if two things have united much of the world in recent years, it would be solidarity with Ukraine after the invasion of Russia and solidarity with Israel after the Hamas terror attack of October the 7th. Of course, the pendulum on one of those started swinging almost immediately, didn't it? When that word disproportionate started appearing, and we thought, what will be a proportionate response to 1,500 disgusting murders? And I don't think anyone thought 48,000 deaths would be a proportionate. Well, that's not true, because there are plenty of people in Israel and beyond who think that 48,000 deaths of Palestinian people is a perfectly reasonable response to the disgusting murders of 1,500. And then when you do try to talk about, well, when you don't talk about it, it's because you've been censored. And when you do talk about it, you're anti-Semitic. Because how do you relay these facts without putting Israel in the dock? And if you put Israel in the dock, then dangerous liars will describe you as anti-Semitic. And they have, I think, probably got more responsibility for the fact that it's not been reported more, that it's not been talked about more than anybody else, because it has now become indefensible. How would you talk about it? How would you open a conversation? Even China and Iran, I think, abstained on that vote, but Israel all in with Russia. How are you going to do it? How are you going to sustain support for this far-right government undertaking what the UN considered to be genocidal acts, up to and including sexual violence? I mean, where is the moral high ground? Where has it gone? It's disappeared. So if you look at how the UK media has offered its support and solidarity to Israel since October the 7th, the reason why perhaps it's gone silent is because it can't do so anymore, but neither can it turn around and say, whoa, this isn't right. How can this be right? That January ceasefire, for which Donald Trump claimed the credit inevitably, was a path, if you like, to achieving both the release of the remaining hostages and the removal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip. Benjamin Netanyahu is now, presumably with Donald Trump's either implicit or explicit support, shifting the goalposts while simultaneously refusing to end the war. People will have died this morning in Gaza. You'll be almost certain of it. And this siege, which continues with impunity. European governments will release critical statements about the halt to aid, but they'll do next to nothing about it. The Trump administration won't even do that. It won't even issue a condemnation or a word of criticism. And the last time we talked about Gaza was when that video emerged, which had actually been done as a satire, as a parody. But Donald Trump posted it from his own social media account, an AI-created aberration, really, that posited the transformation of the Gaza Strip into a Trump-sponsored holiday destination with an enormous golden statue of Donald Trump. So, you have to ask yourself, here's one, David's been in touch, disgraceful anti-Israel diatribe, totally one-sided. Give me a ring, David. Seriously, and tell me what's one-sided about this. What's one-sided about describing the October the 7th terror attacks in the most strong of terms, describing those disgusting, brutal murders and the subsequent response, the suspension of aid, the suspension of electricity, the attempt to move the goalposts on the agreed ceasefire. See, that's not anti-Israel, mate. That's a description of Israel. If that's reaching your ears as bad news for Israel, that's a you problem. That's what they are doing. And if they're doing it in your name, then it's not on me. So this is a question I probably should have asked you before, but I didn't really want to. Has the world given up on Gaza? Does the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House mean that Netanyahu's far-right government gets to continue with its policies of collective punishment, of possible genocide, of pretty much inarguable ethnic cleansing? Do the far-right members of his government, who have seemed comfortable with the idea of using starvation as a method of warfare, now have the whip hand? The attempts to move the goalposts on the agreed deal will not be criticised or called into question by any meaningful diplomacy or any meaningful allies. You've seen how Trump behaves to actual allies like Canada, like Ukraine. So far, Netanyahu has been given a completely free pass to do whatever he wishes. Israel arguably would be more vulnerable to US pressure than any other country, with the possible exception of Ukraine. All he has to do is tell Netanyahu to end the siege and to get the negotiators of the ceasefire, or rather to get the ceasefire back on track with the attempts to move the goalposts scotched. So question number one, I'm not going to use you as my therapist today and try to work out why I don't talk about it more, because I know why I don't talk about it more. There's a degree of fatigue from the horrors that are directed at you personally, but how can you look at the events in Gaza and start feeling sorry for yourself because some people are calling you hurty names? You can't, especially when you know that they're liars. But the reason I can't talk about it as often as, for example, I want to talk about Trump is because I find it harrowing. I found it really, really hard to talk about the terror attacks of October the 7th. Really hard, because it's man's inhumanity to man. It deepens like the coastal shelf. And I find this really hard, and it's been going on for years, or months, certainly. Has the world given up on Gaza? 0345 6060 973. And if it has, what do you think that means? Because and now other people will get a little bit upset with me, but if you consider the safety of the modern state of Israel to be important, if you consider it to be valuable and precious, as I do, I'm not sure that this situation is positive for those concerns. I'm not sure that looking at the road ahead in the Middle East, I'm not at all sure that the actions of Netanyahu and his government, with the support of the Mango Mussolini in the White House, I'm not sure that any of this, I'm pretty sure of the opposite, in fact, is good for the future of the modern state of Israel. So, question number one. Well, I mean, can I do it in two ways? Do you mind? It's the same question asked in two different ways. Why do you think we are not talking about Gaza? 0345 6060 973. And if you're minded to ring in and say it's because we're not allowed to, don't waste your tenpence, seriously, because it's obviously not true. Despite, I don't care who has, anyway. And the second question Has the world turned its back? Has the world put its fingers in its ears now? Because, in my view, of the absolute indefensibility of what Israel continues to do. And then the second stroke third question becomes, well, if it's true, that Donald Trump's arrival in the White House hands Benjamin Netanyahu a carte blanche, you consider how hideous some of those tactics have been already. Donald Trump's arrival in the White House takes off any brakes at all on Netanyahu's actions, on Netanyahu's policies. No checks, no balances whatsoever. Look at how he treated Zelensky in the White House, Donald Trump. And now look at how he treats Netanyahu. And remember, on picking any of this, you're going to have to explain to me why Israel voted with Russia at the United Nations. So there you go. Question number one, why? Why aren't we talking about it? Question number two, has the world turned its back on Gaza? Question number three, if your answer to the second question is yes, what on earth does this mean for the world? Not just for the Palestinian people and Israel, but for the rest of us, for the world. Because if you were minded to support the agenda of Hamas, even a tiny, tiny bit, as a young Palestinian person, these unfolding events still strike me as the mother of all recruiting sergeants. And that bit of the equation seems to me to be the most often overlooked and the most often denied. So there you go. Why aren't we talking about it? Brackets, we are. And if we have turned our back on the Palestinian people, what does that mean for the future of the world? Not just that part of it. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The time is 20 past 10.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10. Thank goodness you put at the very top of this message, I wish to remain anonymous, because the way my switchboard works is that if you've been in touch with the programme before, or indeed if you have your name on your WhatsApp account, it appears at the top of the message on the screen. So sometimes, and I'm conscious that this is not really an excuse for a supposedly professional radio presenter, I'll read the name out before I've read the whole message to the end. And then I get to the end and it says, please don't mention my name. So I have been trying for some time to encourage you to get it right at the top of the message. Please don't read. So thank you. This person has done exactly that. And I'm reading it out just to show you what reality looks like, okay? Because when you are trying to walk a tightrope between extremes, it's easy to lose sight of reality sometimes. And of course, both extremes want you to. Both extremes want you to abandon reality and move towards them. So that's why this one actually means quite a lot to me. Hi, James. I wish to remain anonymous. I'm a British Jew who holds dual Israeli citizenship. I served for 5 years in the IDF in frontline combat roles as an officer. This message is not to comment on the current situation nor the questions that you have asked. Rather, it's to give my opinion that I have found your commentary since October the 7th to be phenomenally well balanced. You've managed to level legitimate criticism at Netanyahu, his government, and the behaviour of some in the IDF without ever crossing a line into anti-Semitism, and you've managed to level the same criticism and scrutiny at Hamas and its supporters without crossing into Islamophobia. I know you don't need me to tell you this. Well, you say that. Nearly said your name then. I know you don't need me to tell you this, but every time you discuss this topic, some numpty will write in calling you anti-Semitic, while another will write in calling you Islamophobic. I don't know if I needed to hear that, but it was nice. So thank you. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Ifti is in Newcastle. Ifti, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiments of the person whose message you just read out. And you've been pretty fair on this subject, or any subject for that matter, to be honest. But you know what, I'm really tired. You stand apart from most of the journalists in Britain and in the West in generally in terms of the media narrative that is pumped out. The question was, is the world getting forgetting Gaza or whatever. I think the case is the world didn't really pay attention. When you talk about the world, in this context, the world means the Western world.
Yes.
Because if you look at the people that voted the United Nations, the vast majority of countries in the world actually condemned Israel and its actions.
Yes.
So when in the Western media, when the word the world is mentioned, it really means the white Western world. That's what it really means. So that's really I mean, I'm being cynical here, but that's not really the world. So the rest of the world is actually concerned.
It's a good point.
I
mean, it's shorthand, and you knew what I was talking about, but it's worth the clarification.
Yeah.
It's worth the clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got a Judaist terrorist state of Israel that has been pummeling the people of Palestine repeatedly over decades. And then when people, in their desperation, commit a horrific, atrocious act in the form of a resistance, hitting back hard when they've got no other options to do anything else because peace talks haven't worked. The Land for Peace deal hasn't worked because Israel never wanted it to work. Israel was never interested in the two-state solution because if it was, it wouldn't keep grabbing lands for the terrorist settlers.
Israel in its current form, if you like, in its current administration, but there are people in Israel, and they have been in positions of power who are committed to the two-state solution, but they're not there now.
I mean, well, one of them was killed, wasn't he?
Yes.
By a protege of Netanyahu. But the reality is, even if you look at the vast public, the majority of the public in Israel, the perception is not one of fairness. It's that we are the victims. This perpetual building up of a sense of victimhood in Israel and in the West of Israeli people. It's always, the media narrative has always been like, look at these victims, whereas the other side has never been portrayed as victims. So to be honest, I'm not surprised. And you know, I'm going to say something here which is probably going to shock you and shock others.
Well, be careful.
I'm glad that Trump has said what he said. It's ironic, but at least he's transparent about the Western world's.
But he doesn't speak. He doesn't speak for everybody, obviously.
No, he doesn't speak for everybody.
And one of the reasons, arguably,
we talk about government.
No, and the reason why you're relieved, and I'm not shocked, is because he crystallises what is often denied.
Absolutely.
Which is making ethnic cleansing official American foreign policy when he talks about getting everybody. I mean, he's backtracked on that. He's probably going to shortly say that they had no choice. And I am not accepting your analysis that there was no choice but to undertake the October the 7th terror attack, but I'm respecting...
No, I'm not.
It sounded like that's what you were saying.
There was no choice. No,
it sounded like that's what you were saying.
No. I'll condemn that, and I'll say it was a wrongful act. And as a Muslim, and I think it's atrocious and a wrongful and a sick act. However, I'm saying when you traumatize people, and Cherie Blair got gagged for saying this many, many years ago, when she talked about the mental trauma of young kids in Palestine, having bombs drop around them all the time, getting killed all the time, that this is leading them to go through, the trauma is leading them to go and commit atrocious acts. And that is a result of what is going to happen. You talked about the biggest recruitment sergeant.
Process of radicalisation, yes. No, I hear you, but I think you came perilously close to sounding more like an excuser than an explainer. But no, don't. I'm happy with your response. I'm happy with your clarification.
Yeah. Okay, thank
you. So why do you think that we are not, and I use we lightly, not talking about it as much as we were, say, a year ago? Or 6 months ago?
I think people are still talking about it. People are still going on protests. People are still objecting to what happens. And you had the person climb on the Westminster Palace the other day as a form of protest as well. But the thing is, the media isn't talking about it because there's a set of people whose value is put at a higher level, and that's the Ukrainian people. And, you know, I have sympathy for the Ukrainian people and their plight, and the Ukrainians didn't launch a hideous terror attack on Russian soil immediately prior to Putin's invasion. So we're not comparing apples with apples. But there's we're not comparing. But as you know, that Western journalists indicated their shock and dismay at blonde, blue-eyed people in this day and age, in the 21st century, being attacked and being killed by Russia, because they were white, blonde, blue-eyed, or whatever people, the same sympathy and the same feeling is not had for brown people or people of color or people who are not European. And that is one of the underlying factors.
And it's no longer a theory. It's essentially a policy in Donald Trump's United States. So again, it's a weird word to use, Ifti, and you're right to sort of preface it with a warning, almost a weirdness warning, but it could be almost a relief to see Donald Trump saying out loud and doing in daylight all of the things that people possessed of similar outlooks on the world have been for years a little bit frightened or very frightened of saying out loud. We want to get all the Palestinian people out of Gaza. I want to turn it into a resort, or similarly the white man should be in charge of everything, which members of his government have literally said on the record. Another story you may not be aware of, the Royal Television Society has been described as cowards by Jonathan Dimbleby, one of the great, one of the doyens of broadcasting in this country, from essentially the royal family of British journalism, because they dropped an award for journalists working in Gaza after that scandal surrounding the BBC documentary presented by the teenager whose father was a Hamas civil servant. 300 signatories on a letter criticising the Society's last-minute decision not to award a prize to a programme that had absolutely nothing to do with the documentary that the BBC has pulled from the iPlayer. The grounds on which the decision has been made, said Dimbleby, the fact that there is an issue around one BBC film, are specious and shallow. No journalist working in Gaza was involved in the making of that film, and the award was for journalists, a sort of collective award for journalists working in Gaza. So that idea of why isn't it being talked about probably plays into the decision of the RTS to bottle the decision to give an award. Simply award human beings who are trying to report the reality of what is happening on the ground. Punishing, in a way, human beings who are trying to report the reality of what is happening on the ground. I can't speak for the RTS, but I suspect they are frightened of the sort of messages that my earlier texters have referred to, coalescing into a form of campaign. And if you think it's an exaggeration, here's Rocco. You don't talk about Gaza because it exposes your support for the racist criminal state of Israel. So David, calling me an anti-Israel propagandist, couple of texts calling me anti-Semitic, listening to the same programme as the people calling me Islamophobic, or in Rocco's case, a supporter of the racist criminal state of Israel. I just want you to know that, particularly if you find yourself in either category, because you're the same as each other. And if there's ever going to be progress or peace, it's going to be down to the rest of us to call for it and provide it. 10:33 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:37. Of course, if we were in the United States, we'd have to add a different dimension to the question of why aren't we talking about Gaza anymore? The answer would be because you could get deported for doing so. The US State Department has made it clear that a man called Mahmoud Khalil has not committed any crimes. He is a green card holder. And a US resident, a permanent US resident. He's currently being held in a Louisiana detention center because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, quotes, has reasonable ground to believe that your presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the US. He was a key figure in the Solidarity encampment at Columbia University, mediating between the pro-Palestine protesters and the university administrators. But don't forget, Nick had a guest on a while ago explaining how Trump was going to be really good for free speech in the United States of America. And don't forget that this is very much of a piece with the rhetoric of people like Suella Braverman, who sought to describe everybody essentially taking to the streets of London to say to Israel, please stop killing Palestinians, describe them all as Hamas supporters. And well, there would have been some Hamas supporters or Hamas sympathizers in their throng. To malign them all in that way is not an exercise of free speech. It's an exercise in hideous slander. And it's done very, very deliberately. So maybe it's obvious why we, I use the word loosely, are not talking about it anymore. 10:38 is the time. I'll read this quickly and then we'll go to Peter. James, as an Israeli, I usually agree with you, but you're falling into Netanyahu's trap. This is from Shahaf. As Kissinger said, Israel doesn't have a foreign policy, only internal politics. Netanyahu is a propaganda master. Polls show that most Israelis want the war to end. The opposition demands an inquiry that he continues to block, and he keeps shifting blame despite having been in charge for 15 years. He and his circle are under investigation for taking Qatari bribes and funding Hamas for a decade. To distract, his cronies push empty gestures like cutting the 1% of Gaza's power just for the headlines. And this is where I suppose, Shahaf, you're telling me I'm falling into the trap, probably accurately. The ceasefire remains. Reservists refuse to return. Ultra-Orthodox allies reject conscription, and he knows ending the war will mean his own downfall. As for the UN vote, Israel sided with the US, as always, because under Netanyahu, it's now just a Trump client state. So maybe that's why the conversation has gone so quiet, because if you wanted to defend what is happening, you'd struggle. So best to say nothing at all. Peter's in Kingsway. Peter, what would you like to say?
Well, everything you've just said, I absolutely agree with. I mean, it is true to say that people are bored with the whole discussion of Gaza for the simple reason that they've given up hope for a solution. I'm talking about the general public.
Yes.
And I think that the media hasn't really locked on to the core issue of what it would take to reach a peaceful solution. For example, how many people know that the bulk of the Israeli population live parallel to the West Bank, and that the distance from the border of the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea is only a few kilometers, 20 kilometers roughly. And so any military thrust through the center of the West Bank to the Mediterranean can cut Israel in two, north to south. Now, that's the geography side of it. But the reason why people are bored with it is because for decades, people have not really cared about what happens to people who are not within their local sphere of interest, day to day. And in Israel, at the moment, although the majority of people want the war to end, they want the hostages back, nevertheless, they will never agree to take a risk on a two-state solution because of the geography. The risk of a sudden attack can split the country in two, and they don't want to be caught unawares. So on the one hand, although it sounds like a great idea, a two-state solution, it needs a peace treaty to be able to give it any teeth. Because without a peace treaty, you cannot have a two-state solution, because all that will mean is a stepping stone to taking over the rest of Israel, as seen by Israelis. They see Hamas as wanting only to have and that's a shift in the Hamas position, by the way, because originally they didn't want to recognize the state of Israel at all. And it's not clear today even whether Hamas actually would welcome a two-state solution. And so for decades, you had this divide amongst the Palestinians. You had Fatah on the West Bank, who wanted to talk peace. You had Hamas, who are the state of Gaza, effectively, and don't want a two-state solution at all. And so until they come together, there can never be a two-state solution. And Israel has divided and conquered on that basis. So we in the West, we don't see the minutiae of the politics. We only see the headlines that we see on our television screens and the horrors of what happened in Gaza and so on. We don't understand, because we're not presented with the complication, the detail. And
to be fair, we're not even seeing many headlines at the moment. I think the UN report this morning about sexual violence and genocidal acts, I think 6 months ago would have garnered rather more attention. Maybe I'm jumping the gun. Maybe it'll make tomorrow's media a little bit more impactfully than it has today, because it only broke shortly before we came on air. A word, if you would, Peter, about your background, because I think it's pertinent. And then, if I may, a nudge towards the question of what the events of the last 18 months, what the events of the last 50 days, what Trump's arrival in the White House means for the future of some of the things that you've just described.
Well, my background is that I emigrated to Israel. Actually, I went there for a holiday and decided to stay, and that was in the early 70s. And I had to go to the army if I wanted to stay and live in the country, and became a veteran of the Yom Kippur War in an artillery unit on the Golan Heights. And as a result of that, I saw firsthand what shock means, real shock. I mean, at that point, we were threatened with annihilation as we saw it, and for the first 48 hours, it was a very real risk. And that shook me to the core. And I think that today, moving on to Trump, as what you say,
yes.
What Trump does is try to provoke a reaction. When he, for example, said he wants to move all the Palestinians out of Gaza and turn it into... What he really was trying to do was push the Arab countries into finding a solution. I don't know if you can remember, but it was 2 days before the Arabs were going to meet in Cairo,
yes.
Egypt, Jordan. The idea was, if you don't take notice and come up with a solution, this is what I'm going to do. He didn't really mean it.
And indeed, I don't know if you know, but 7 hours ago, he retreated from that position. And I mean, literally saying out loud, nobody's expelling any Palestinians.
Because he never meant it in the first place. And people fall into the trap of thinking that he's serious.
Yeah, but sometimes he is. I mean, this was yesterday's show. Yeah. To be fair, I mean, none of us are soothsayers. We can't examine the entrails of a chicken and decide when he is actually serious and when he's not.
Sure. Listen, I agree with you there, 100%. Yeah. He's like a child in a sweet shop who picks up a Mars bar and then suddenly decides he doesn't like it anymore and he'll pick something else up. He's not, and it is his unpredictability which does shake people up. And unfortunately, we only seem to lock on to literally what he says, and that he means it. We don't see the geopolitical reasons why he does things that and says things. Like, for example, he never really intended to cut off Ukraine from intelligence. He simply used it as a weapon to force Ukraine into accepting the idea of giving way.
Well, I think we've had a lovely exercise in consensus. I don't necessarily agree with the final points that you've made in the analysis of Trump. But as I say, that was yesterday's show. On the question of where we are and why we are there, thank you, because you've brought my understanding up a gear or three, and I know an awful lot of people listening will feel the same. And it's a terrible word to use, bored, isn't it? But unfortunately, I think it's probably a fair one. Not for you necessarily, of course, but for many. 10:47 is the time, and you couple it with that message I read out to you that Peter began his contribution by concurring with, that idea that we are looking at a kind of exercise in distraction and exercises in propaganda, and the stuff that perhaps still makes occasional headlines, although not as many as it used to, distracts from the nuance and the detail that Peter just provided. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 11. Again, anonymity is important, but I do find this persuasive, the idea that the conversation has been stifled somewhat because the abuse to which people keen to conduct the conversation are exposed is so vitriolic. This is a private message I've received from a broadcaster you will be familiar with, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. And they don't work in the news sphere, okay? I've posted a fair bit on the atrocities that have been committed there. I can't sit back and say nothing as a father, but every time the kickback has been pretty grim. Accusations of being a Hamas supporter, an anti-Semite, etc., etc. I've been continually perplexed by the silence of so many, and they provide an example of the kind of vitriol that they've been exposed to. But you're clever, aren't you? So if I read that out, you'll be able to do a reverse search and work out who it is that sent me this message. But that is somebody who just wants to contribute to the discourse but feels squeezed out of it. And I don't know what you say about that. It's just true. Why aren't we talking about it? Because so many people don't want us to. Why would you not want us to? I think there is an imbalance here, despite Rocco considering me a friend of the racist, genocidal state of Israel. I think there is an imbalance in the current situation, in that what Netanyahu is doing is impossible to defend. So regardless of your views about the necessity of the modern state of Israel remaining safe and sovereign, and indeed the unique status that Jewish people have in the post-war period, the unique necessity of a haven, a place you can go when it starts again. Things that I believe deeply, passionately, things that inform my attitude to all of these issues and conversations. At the moment, you can't defend what Netanyahu is doing, so you'd rather that the conversation wasn't conducted at all. And we'll spend 17 hours talking about the teenage presenter of a BBC documentary instead, without mentioning the fact that aid has been cut off, that electricity has been cut off, that the UN has found evidence, it says, of genocidal acts and sexual violence in Gaza, and that 48,000 people are already dead, and goodness knows how many more will be found to have died once you are permitted to start rifling through the rubble. 10:53 is the time. Hussein is in Brighton. Hussein, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. The reason why the media's silent on the matter at the moment.
It's not silent. It's not. I'm being a bit pedantic. It's not silent. I mean, we're in the middle of a conversation about it. The Financial Times carries an excellent op-ed today. Reuters has reported But yes, that's the question that I'm asking.
The leader of the free world yesterday called Chuck Schumer a Palestinian. That's a racist slur. No one talks about it. This is the leader of the free world, but put that to one side.
I've got that clip, actually. I'll dig it out for you, just to enforce the point that you're making. It's an anti-Semitic slur, as well as racist. It's because Schumer is Jewish.
But I had to dig and dig and dig to finally get an actual news story. Yeah. I couldn't see it anywhere.
Go on.
James, sorry. Yeah. So what I was saying was, if we've got news headlines like 40 beheaded babies, or babies baked in ovens, or mass rape, etc., this fits a particular narrative, and that narrative, for whatever reason, suits certain news organisations, and they will go hell and leather to put their reports on their front pages, etc. Look. About a month after the war started, on the 7th of October, there was the former top military officer, I think it was General Aviv Kohavi.
Right.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Literally went on the news rounds to the BBC, to The Guardian, to all these editors, to the Financial Times, to Sky News, met with David Lammy on a news tour. Basically, why? To coerce these news channels to perpetuate their narrative. What happened to Sangeeta, even at LBC?
No, that's just Rolex, mate. And I mean, you can say it because you've got free speech, but that's just crap.
Thank you.
All right. We all sit in. I'll tell you something, because it bores me rigid. This, and I can't believe that certain people have allowed this lie to be perpetuated. We sit in a room every 3 months. Every single person that works here. We sit in a room every 3 months. They show us graphs of how our program is performing. Right? Everybody knows when someone's vulnerable. And it's not the graph of what audience you inherit when you come on air. It's a graph of how your audience falls or rises during the duration of your program. Every single person in this building sits in that room and watches a graph for every single program every 3 months. All right?
I don't want to get off topic.
No,
James,
you said it. You can't backtrack now, mate. You have decided. You have decided to believe something that isn't true, and the only person that can prove to you that it isn't true has decided to stay silent and allow people like you to believe slurs and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about her former colleagues. So
I didn't make an anti-Semitic slur or anything.
Yes, you are. You're claiming that someone has been censored or silenced when they haven't.
But that's not anti-Semitic. How's that anti-Semitic? That in itself is what's wrong with everything.
Okay, mate. I am setting the record straight on something, okay? And the idea that somebody would be silenced for being critical of Israel during a phone-in that is heavily critical of Israel is palpably absurd. You can dispute the fact that it's anti-Semitic. That's my opinion. And that is my freedom of speech that I am exercising, just as you are exercising yours. But if you choose to come on this program and tell lies about every single one of my colleagues, I will push back, okay? And that is what you are doing. I sympathise with you because the lies have been deliberately allowed to fester by somebody who can only answer for their own conduct. But it is lies, okay? And if you want to come on this program again, you are more than welcome.
Thank you, James.
So now back to the subject in hand.
Thank you. James, what I was saying was there was a concerted effort by people within the Israeli government to go out to news organisations. That's not anti-Semitic. That's fact.
Yeah, no, of course it is.
And I've said the name. They went round. They did literally a news round. Why? Why are news channels even entertaining? You guys should be completely independent. We just want the truth, like you just said. Fine. If you've put me straight on the Sangeeta story, then that's fine.
I shouldn't really have had to. It shouldn't have fallen to me to do that. If it was me in that position, I'd have done it myself. I wouldn't have waited for somebody else to have to do it on the station. But that falls to me. And I accept most of what you say. So what you haven't addressed is the question of why it has now stopped.
What I'm saying is that there is an immense pressure put on news organisations to follow a particular narrative.
No, but there isn't. You see, no, that there genuinely isn't. I didn't want to talk about this today for emotional reasons, not because anybody's putting pressure on me. And I think if I were a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to talk about it for reasons of shame.
James, not for a second. I see you as somebody who's very level-headed. Not for a second. I think that you're too big to cut, by the way. That's my personal opinion. I think...
Well, okay, you can carry on believing nonsense, can't you? But we sit in the same room every 3 months looking at the same figures and the same graphs. But hey, that's fine. I can talk about whatever I want, as I am proving to you now, and so can my colleagues. It is coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12, which, goodness me, will be a welcome moment. But in the next hour, I turn your attention to my old friend Jamie Oliver, who not only in the field of food, but also in the field of learning difficulties and dyslexia, remains a doughty campaigner committed to improving the lives of people other than himself, because his life is pretty nice. And some of the stuff that he's said in the last couple of years on the subject of dyslexia and how it makes you feel are incredibly powerful.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 2 minutes after 11. There's a brilliant article in The Independent, actually, by a former BBC journalist called Karishma Patel, which makes the point that Hussein was making before he got a little distracted in the last call of the last hour, that I shall share with you on my Blue Sky account shortly. But I mean, it's under the headline, I'm a former BBC newsreader. Gaza is the reason I resigned. And it makes many of the points. In fact, you could argue it proves many of the points that Hussein was making. I'll turn your attention next to one of my favourite people on the planet, actually, Jamie Oliver, opening up about the impact dyslexia had on his school years. I mean, one of the things I often wonder about work-wise is, I do, because I've told you a million times, the oxygen question. When you sort of think, that's just so awful, I don't want to give it any oxygen. When people are so desperately and obviously begging for attention, you find yourself thinking, should I give them any? But the damage they do when you don't can sometimes be greater. I mean, the extreme example of this in recent years would be Andrew Tate, of course. And I got that horribly wrong, I think. But there is a column or an article in the Daily Mail today that appears essentially under the headline, Dyslexia Doesn't Exist. And you sort of find yourself almost marveling at the contortions that would need to be undertaken and the absolute determination to ignore the testimony and the experiences of people diagnosed with dyslexia. It's almost unbelievable how they are capable of contorting themselves in that way. But I don't think today is a day to give it more oxygen. Today is a day to listen to what it's like. Here's a little clip of Jamie talking to the BBC.
If you've got ideas and answers up here, it doesn't matter if you write it, it doesn't matter if you type it, it doesn't matter if it's Morse code, it doesn't matter if a computer does. When I got my first book deal, the first 3 books I wrote was on a dictaphone. I've never written a thing in my life because I can't. I got it, but I can't do it. We need to test and push kids in schools, of course. But how they get their communication on page shouldn't be defined and rigid. Like the dyslexic kids and the neurodiverse kids need other ways to express themselves. They might need more time. They might need assistance.
Now, he was talking yesterday about how when he went off on this slightly unexpected tangent, he couldn't believe the explosion of support and love that he received on social media. I think it was before Elon Musk bought Twitter, shortly before Elon Musk bought Twitter, when it could still be a place where explosions of love might unfold. And he's gone on to describe how it affected his mental well-being. I think that's why you could hear anger in his voice. He said, I used to put defense mechanisms up to disguise that I was struggling. I was using my sense of humor and cooking and being an idiot to mask feeling very low self-esteem and thick, stupid, dumb idiot. So the way those words are almost spat out speaks to the pain I think that he still carries. I got 2 GCSEs, he reveals, so I did struggle, but I was one of many. Now, I freaked Jamie out the first time I met him. It was before we became friends, when he was just doing the rounds of studios. And I 2 things happened that day that were quite funny. One is that it turned out he'd been at college with my producer, and he was so excited to see her again, to acquaint himself with my producer at the time, that he barely noticed I was in the room, and I was in full fanboy mode. And the second bit was, I'm such a fan of his that I said stuff to him during that interview, and he was freaked out that I even knew it, because he gave one interview years ago when he was talking about the moment when the teacher would come into his classroom and take out the children that had special educational needs. They would go off for their remedial classes. I think that's when he became friends with Jimmy, the fellow who looks a little bit like a slimmer version of me. That is one of his best friends, and they've made programs together. And he said in this interview, he said that he remembered that everyone else in the class would sing the words special needs to the tune of Let It Be. And we're going back over 10 years now. And he was telling it as a funny story. He was in that kind of it didn't do me any harm phase. I think he was. I haven't run any of this by him, for the record. But I found it really heartbreaking on his behalf. And he was still in the process of persuading himself that it was fine. Do you see what I mean? That it was almost funny. So imagine that. The teacher comes into your classroom, all of the children that need remedial classes because they have learning difficulties or special needs, in his case dyslexia. It's usually accompanied by other forms of neurodiversity as well. And everyone in the class, including your mates, it's not bullying, it's just, I don't know what you call it. Everyone starts singing special needs to the tune of Let It Be. I'm not going to do it. And that, I think, is the counterbalance to where he has arrived since, talking about how it hurt him, how he would put up defense mechanisms. I think the way he told that story back in the day was actually part of the defense mechanism. And he ended up running away from school, even though he loved it. He was running away. He said, I was running away from words and reading and writing. And I thought it was just me. But there's hundreds and thousands of us every year that are doing that. And this is why he is campaigning, continues to campaign almost constantly, for better support for children and for the parents of dyslexic children. Now, what I find particularly fascinating about this is the idea that you can go through your whole life without knowing. I've told you a few times about a curious encounter I had in a pub in Stockport many years ago. with a fellow who had a copy of the Sun newspaper poking out of his back pocket. Mrs. O'Brien was on a doorstep, and I had accompanied her. It was in the early days of our courtship when, frankly, I'd like nothing more than just sitting in the passenger seat of a car for 6 hours if it meant I got to spend time with her. Still do feel that way, to be honest. We're very blessed. But she went off to do the doorstep, which meant I was kicking my heels in a little village outside Stockport called Romilly, near where my godparents lived, actually, but they weren't in. And I had several hours to kill, so I did what I would always do at that point in my life, and I went to the pub. It was a proper pub as well. It was one of the only pubs I've ever been in that still had sawdust on the ground in the saloon bar as opposed to the lounge bar. And I got chatting to some gentlemen. They told me 3 extraordinary stories. The first of which involved an Alsatian dog eating somebody's false teeth, and the false teeth being back in that person's mouth at the time they were telling me the story. So I'll leave you to work out the journey that those false teeth had taken. The second involved them telling me that they'd spent the previous evening stealing copper off a church roof, but I think they might have been yanking my middle-class chains on that one. But the third one, which only happened when we were a few pints in and a couple of the other fellas had drifted off, and it was just me and the kind of ringleader, the kind of boss, if you like, of the group. And I asked if I could have a little look at his newspaper. And he told me that he couldn't read. And the reason why he walked around with a copy of the Sun in his pocket every day was so that no one ever noticed that he couldn't read. And he was bright. You know, when people are funny, there's a level of funny. There's a kind of funny that you can't have unless you're clever. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. But you know what I'm talking about, a quickness of thought. I was watching Lee Mack on old clips of Would I Lie to You last night, and that speed of thought, I don't know if it's measured intellectually. I don't know if you can say that a certain type of humour, a quickness of wit, it's not a coincidence that we talk about quick wits, is it? And he had it. He had me rolling around on the floor, and he was fast, and he had a way with words, verbally. But he told me that I couldn't read, that he couldn't read. I think it was even before I had this job. So I had very, very few windows on the world. My insular existence, my kind of undiverse experiences were pretty complete. It's only really doing this job that's given me the ability to know what the world looks like through a million different eyes. And I couldn't quite believe it. I couldn't believe you could get into adulthood. I couldn't believe you could be fully functional. I couldn't believe you could be sitting in a pub, chewing the fat with a complete stranger, reducing him to fits of laughter, and literally not able to read the front page of the newspaper that you had in your back pocket. It was incredible. And that's why this hour, I just want to know what it's like, really. I want to know 2 things. I want to know particularly what a late life diagnosis is like. Because it's Jamie's words about... I find it quite moving, actually, because as you know, I think he's a wonderful human being. But when he says these words as if he is kind of bullying himself, thick, stupid, dumb, idiot, as if and you know that sometimes you do that. Sometimes, particularly children can do that. Self-loathing leads often to self-harm. That idea that you don't like who you are. I'm stupid, I'm thick, I'm dumb, I'm an idiot, and you're not. You've just got word blindness, as it used to be called, or dyslexia, as we call it now. And when he talks about the struggle, he talks about the damage it does to your self-worth that starts evaporating at the age of 10. And he campaigns now for the 13-year-old kids who are struggling with reading. He says, I want to look you in the eye and say, you are not worthless. How can you not like that? How can you not encourage that? But how can we find out more about it? I'll tell you, if you're a parent, some of the things you can do to help your children, some of the tips that are offered up on providing help. But I think that the lad who, good Lord, I'm 90% sure that the lad who gave us What Was It Like was dyslexic. You remember this story? We're all sitting in the gym at my prep school, and some old colonel has just given us a speech about his trip up the Zambezi with a slideshow. And at the end of it, and we're all bored rigid. Don't hate me. We're all bored rigid with it and can't wait for the end to come. But it's better than being in lessons. And at the end, any questions? Does anybody have any questions? And this lad sticks his hand straight in the air, like we all knew he would because he always did, and the headmaster completely ignores him because his questions were always a little bit left field. Completely ignores him, and none of the rest of us, and we're doing it on purpose now. Is this a story I've told more often than any other on the radio? I wonder how many people are now hearing it for the first time. And I know Davey says, you've got to send him some royalties, James. You're not wrong. And we all don't put our hands up. Because you know what I'm like. I love the sound of my own voice so much. I'm almost always got my hand in the air when there's an opportunity to ask a question. But we knew what we were doing. We wanted this lad's question. Because A, we wanted to hear what it was. And B, we were enjoying the headmaster's just, come on, O'Brien, do you have a question? No, sir, sorry, sir. Keith, you must have a question. No, sir, sorry, sir. So in the end, he turns to this lad. I can remember his name. And he just said, and remember, we've just had an hour of being told what this trip was like. Well, for 50 minutes, 10 minutes for questions at the end. That was ambitious. And because you had to stand up when you did. So he gets to his feet quite slowly because you've been sitting with your legs crossed for 50 minutes. And even at the age of 12, that can be quite painful. And he gets to his feet and he just goes, what was it like? And you can imagine there's 140 boys in the gym and every single one of them at that point just collapse in fits of giggles. And he's a lovely boy, so he quite enjoyed the fact that we were all highly amused, but he wasn't entirely sure why. And we teased him a bit for that. And it's only since I started doing this job that I've realised that is the best question you can ask. Because what the Colonel hadn't told us was what it felt like. He didn't talk to us about fear or trepidation, about excitement or about thrills. He just spoke to us about marine life and trees and boats and rations and clothes. He didn't talk to us about what it had felt like. So my mate, who was dyslexic, I don't think I've mentioned that before, my mate's brain was actually ahead of the rest of us. And he got appalling grades like Jamie coming out of school with 2 GCSEs. The lad was always at the bottom of the class, always at the bottom of the bottom set in the bottom class. And yet that question there, what was it like, is such a beautiful, beautiful question. Tracy says, you've told this story so many times that whenever I hear anyone say, what was it like, it's that voice that comes into my head. And there are some people hearing it for the first time. Charlie writes, that is absolutely priceless. I don't know what his struggles were. Being at a private school, he'd have had a huge advantage over kids like Jamie Oliver at state school. But what's it like to discover late in life? I want you to talk to me, A, about what it does to your self-worth. You know on some level that you're not thick, but you just can't do words. 0345 6060 973. And then the second question becomes, what's it like to find out? Particularly late in life. I think children must and should be diagnosed as much as is humanly possible because that's the only way you can get them the help that they need. But if you've carried this, I often think about that fella I met in the pub in Romilly. It was a Robinson's pub, if you're wondering. I often think about him. I wonder whether he ever got the help that he so obviously needed and so obviously deserved. What's it like to discover late in life that you weren't thick at all? That you weren't, let's run through that litany of pejoratives that Jamie has been haunted by. Thick, stupid, dumb, idiot. That internal voice saying these things to you. And then you get the diagnosis and that voice is silenced. I would love you to tell me what that's like. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And just before we go to the break, this is from Lizzie. Jamie Oliver went to my school. He was a few years older than me, and he came back to speak to the students while I was there. Oh, you're going to set me off, Lizzie. He said the speech was for the kids who struggled and who didn't enjoy school. We all loved it. It was so inspiring. I was undiagnosed dyscalculic at the time. That's a condition that is to numbers what dyslexia is to words and letters. And it really hit home for me. I just remember the whole hall being engaged and laughing along with him. What a moment that must have been for him as well. To return as the conquering hero, having left with 2 GCSEs and that the sound of special needs being sung to the tune of Let It Be ringing in his ears. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is is 20 minutes after 11. James, this is from Dave on Merseyside. Where's the show on YouTube? I can only see historic shows, not today's show. It's not there yet, mate. Doesn't go up live on YouTube. It goes up a little bit later in the day. Honestly, some people, I just can't win. And Chris asks, what happened next? You've never told us the next bit of the story, what the response was to what was it like by the lecturer or the teacher. That's from Chris in Walton-on-Thames. I can't remember. You wouldn't be able to remember either. 140 boys rolling around on the floor in hysterics. I've got absolutely no idea. I presume he had a crack at answering it. I think he did, actually, sort of coming through the mists of time. Well, it was a very exciting experience. But anyway, who cares, Chris? Come on. And on the list of enjoyable compliments that the programme has received, I quite like this from Mintoff on Blue Sky. Listening to you now, this is going back a bit into the first hour of the programme, but I only just saw it. Listening to you now, and you've made me burn my toast. Can we put that on the adverts? Be careful. If you listen, be careful. You might burn your toast. Does that work? Doesn't quite work, does it? Dyslexia. Sally is in Harold Wood. Sally, what would you like to say?
Hi. I was diagnosed later in life, and it is really impacting. So through my childhood, I was almost expelled from a state school because the teachers just saw me as being naughty.
Disruptive, because you didn't understand what was going on, so you started amusing yourself.
Exactly. Or they would come to me and go, "Oh, Sally, can you answer this?" And you'd just be like, "Oh, I don't really know the answer, so I'm going to be naughty." Yeah. And so they...
Because the alternative is to be stupid.
Yeah,
or to seem stupid. Obviously, you're not stupid. Yeah,
and I'd just be the funny clown in the class and get thrown out. That's how I went. Yeah. And then as I was kind of going through the education, there's the art teacher kind of started looking after me and started guiding me into that world. And I ended up kind of working in that creative world. So I'm now a designer, and it never held me back. But when I was at university, I started failing again.
Right.
And the professors were like, "Well, your design work is all like, first class, but your written dissertation is going to fail your degree."
And no one spotted it.
No. When you look back at my work from school, you can really see it. It's really obvious. But because in state school, there were so many children, our classes were packed.
And they do their best. I want to make that absolutely clear. The teachers are doing their best.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're masking. You're masking, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I got to university and I was in my late 20s, I went to see a psychiatrist who diagnosed me, because by that point you've built up all these barriers, so they have to break through them. Yeah. And they kind of diagnosed me then, and it was like someone's cleaned the window in front of you, because you're kind of going, "Oh my God, now I can see why I'm not stupid. This is why this keeps happening to me." So, and dyslexia comes out in people in different ways. So it will be something like someone will repeat, "Oh, I'll see you on Tuesday at 4:00. A lot of dyslexic people forget that immediately. Right. So it's not just reading a book, "Oh, I can't read." It's remembering things, remembering names, facts, phone numbers, anything like that. Okay. So you start coming up with methods to try and help yourself. So that's how it helps you in later life, actually being diagnosed, because you then realise this will always happen to me.
What was that moment like when they said to you, "You are dyslexic, you have dyslexia"?
It's emotional. I was really, even now I find people I come up against and I'm like, "Well, I'm dyslexic and I have to declare it." So I go, "That's why I won't remember this. I'm so sorry." Yeah. But at the time when they told me, I was just like, "Oh, thank God." Because all that time I'm like, I must be stupid, right? I must be, I can't read. I can't
Everyone else is
this.
doing something that they seem to find really, really easy, and I don't. Therefore, there's something wrong with me. This is a me problem.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. Absolutely. So, and you kind of keep trying to reread the book, and then you can't. But I think it's, when they were asking me to do exams at school, I was like, "Oh, I can't remember what that's about," and things like that. So I then went and did university. So I ended up being dyslexic, 2 undergraduate degrees, 1 postgraduate degree, and PhD qualification. So it doesn't stop you.
So take that. And you didn't, and of course the teachers were just working with what they could see and didn't have the time and the space to dig a little deeper, which is why I mentioned, I don't think it was a controversial thing to say that the lad I was at school with, because we were at private school, the ratio of teachers to children was much greater, would have got help that he needed that you would not have got. Thank you, Sally. John's in Maidstone. John, what would you like to say?
Right, I'm ready.
You all right?
Hello, mate. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. What's on your mind?
Right, mind. Right. Well, I'm dyslexic.
Yes.
I'm 68 years old. I'm a consultant engineer, or was.
Yeah.
All right. I went to school, couldn't read.
All the way
needs to
through.
know.
All the way through.
All the way through. All the way through. Couldn't read. Mum's a mathematics teacher. Father's actually a senior lecturer in a university.
Wow.
I can't read.
Did they know? Did they know?
No.
How did you hide it?
They figured it out by the time I was about 9.
Right.
But dyslexia didn't exist.
No.
It didn't exist when I was down there, so that's late 60s, mid 70s.
Didn't have a name.
No idea. So I just found out to actually tell you what my dyslexia is all about.
Yeah.
I'm word blind.
Go on.
All right? So let's put you in a situation, you're going down, let's say you've got a big job interview.
Yeah.
And the thing is you can fill your name and address out. That's great. That's not a problem. You get into it and say, well, what we want to do is find out which sort of genre you want to follow through journalism. So we're going to sit you down and we're going to ask you some specific questions that you've got to write an answer to. Okay, so you go down there. You're sitting in a room. You're thinking about it. The test paper's in front of you. There's 10 questions. You've got to write 300 words for each question, just to actually point the direction as to where you want to go. You open the paper, and it's written in Ming Chinese.
Just no clue at all.
That's a problem.
Just no clue at all.
Is that a problem?
How did you?
Right.
No, I hear you, I get that. How did you hide it? Can you remember how you managed to?
Yes.
Go on.
Yeah. You know, in classes, you used to have to, stand up and read a bit.
Yes.
Or do something. Well, the idea was to find a window to fall asleep. Although you weren't asleep, you just pretended at the back of the classroom you were asleep
out.
and you're taking
And the teacher doesn't
That's
really
it.
want the hassle of dragging you back into consciousness, so they'll just ask someone else to read it out.
That's right. They might ask you once or twice, in which case, pick up wherever it was.
So when,
sorry, I was asleep.
When and how did you learn to read, John?
Right. Well, my particular one was actually, I could not spell. I could not see these words. I couldn't see the letters. I had no idea. So now you've got a task.
Yeah.
Now, I'm up into about 22, 23 years old. I've gone
Lord.
through an engineering apprenticeship.
Right.
I still can't read. I cannot read. All right?
Yeah.
I'm figuring it out by pictures and numbers.
Yeah.
Numeracy is no problem because I'm an engineer. I work numbers, no problems.
Right.
But I can't read the word.
So you're not stupid because you're good with numbers.
No. What I've got to do is look at the word and say it's not a word.
Right.
It's a pattern.
Yes.
And the pattern is made up of various squiggles and shapes. Now you've got a word. Now you've got to memorise that pattern as to where the lines go, of exactly what the word is and what it means. That is dyslexia.
But did you get help when you were 23? Did you get help reading?
No.
So you just worked out your own code almost. Code breaking.
It's not a code. You can actually read, the way that you normally read now is you think you go phonetically through the alphabet and you write your A's and your B's and so. But I've got to learn that because I don't recognise what an A looks like.
Right.
Now I've got to learn how a word looks like or how an A looks like joined up to the next word.
And did you ever get an official diagnosis?
Of what?
Of dyslexia. Stupid? No, of dyslexia. I mean, later in life.
It didn't exist when I was a kid.
No, but it exists now.
It exists now, but look, I'm nearly 70 years old. I've finished my career.
And
there's
nothing particularly to be gained from it. But you know what it was now, and you didn't know then. You thought it was just. Did you think it was just you back in the day?
No, it wasn't, because my mum figured it out.
Right.
But figured it out. The idea was that we could figure out, because numeracy was no problem. I recognise numbers.
And then a long and successful career as a consultant engineer.
And then, and various other bits and pieces. But I could not read, and the idea was you have to learn the pattern of the word. So
I hear it. I've got to go to the news, John. I'm late for the news. I just want to head towards the news with a quick word from a friend of mine, Scott, who some of you will be familiar with. He's the T-shirt king of Uxbridge, and he's been in touch to say, I also got 2 GCSEs, but I've not got dyslexia. So now I feel really stupid. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
do you find out if you're dyslexic? For years, words aren't what I first thought. I have to double read everything. I don't want my name read out, just an answer if possible. How do you, as an adult, find out if you are dyslexic? And this from Sabina, who says, the caller, John, who we just had in Maidstone, reminds me of the comedian Ross Noble, who's also dyslexic, and no one knew he couldn't read because he'd memorise whole words instead. I can't remember if it was actually on Full Disclosure that he revealed this. Well, don't worry, Sabina, nor can I, and I was presenting it. I was conducting the interview with Ross, who's a brilliant, beautiful man. 11:34 is the time. So Keir Starmer, as you heard in the news, has just announced that he is abolishing NHS England, which sounds like a really big deal. But I don't really understand what it means. Happily, Natasha Clark is here.
I'll try my best, James. Yes, I think it sounds like, on the face of it, a really huge announcement, doesn't it? He's delivered a major speech this morning promising that it's going to slash red tape and free up civil servants and NHS staff in order to put them back on the front line of the NHS. He also said he would put thousands of them working in the civil service on notice that they need to buck up and deliver or risk losing their jobs. Here's him speaking in the last sort of hour or so, saying that the NHS England body, which has a budget of around £168 billion and runs NHS services from the top, he says that is doing a lot of work that the Department of Health is already doing.
And I can't, in all honesty, explain to the British people why they should spend their money on 2 layers of bureaucracy. That money could and should be spent on nurses, doctors, operation, GP appointments. So today I can announce we're going to cut bureaucracy across the state, focus government on the priorities of working people, shift money to the front line. So I'm bringing management of the NHS back into democratic control by abolishing the arm's-length body NHS England. That will put the NHS back at the heart of government where it belongs, freeing it to focus on patients, less bureaucracy, with more money for nurses, an NHS refocused on cutting waiting times at your hospital.
The Prime Minister also said that there was too much red tape and rules holding Britain back.
Some parts of the state haven't got the memo. I'll give you an example. There's an office conversion in Bingley, which, as you know, is in Yorkshire. That is an office conversion that will create 139 homes. But now the future of that is uncertain because the regulator was not properly consulted on the power of cricket balls. That's 139 homes. Now just think of the people, the families, the individuals who want those homes, to buy those homes, to make their life, and now they're held up. Why? You'll decide whether this is a good reason. Because, and I'm going to quote, this is the reason, because the ball strike assessment doesn't appear to have been undertaken by a specialist qualified consultant. So that's what's holding up these 139 homes.
A ball trajectory risk assessment. I did hear that correctly.
Yeah, that's correct.
Cricket balls.
So these are two slightly separate things here.
Yes.
I may have slightly conflated them. One is NHS England being completely abolished. Keir Starmer's calling it the biggest quango in the world. The second clip that you just heard is Keir Starmer talking about why he believes that there's too many quangos and too many regulators holding Britain back, including one example, he says, of a housing development. And we've been hearing government ministers talk about this all week, about how they didn't have the correct assessor of cricket balls, essentially give the right...
yeah, but he thinks he's picked a winner here. But if they go ahead with this and someone gets hit on the head with a cricket ball in the second week that they've moved into their flat,
Well, yeah, and my question is, Grenfell, right?
Yeah,
that's
of course.
My first thought
regulation, reducing red tape. Exactly. What is bureaucracy?
Yeah, totally. And the Prime Minister is doing this for money. It's not quite clear how much it's going to raise. They haven't told us that. He thinks it's going to raise hundreds of millions of pounds. Like I just said, this is a huge quango. It has a huge budget of around £168 billion. This is all part of the Andrew Lansley reforms to the health service, the top-down
2012
reorganisation.
Health and Social Care Act.
Exactly. So that was, NHS England was established around 2013. It was meant to essentially give an independent body to the NHS so they could make their own decisions. This is Keir Starmer today saying, well, actually, I don't trust that these guys are doing anything the right way that I want them to, that the government wants them to. I don't have enough control over it. I'm going to take it back into the Department of Health.
Always worth remembering that patient satisfaction in the NHS was the highest it has ever been in 2010. when David Cameron became Prime Minister, and this policy was enacted 2 years later. What's the phone in, Natasha?
Do you feel that scrapping NHS England is a good idea?
See, it's not as easy as I make it look, is it?
It's not. Well, no, it's not. It's definitely not. But look, do we need to scrap more red tape to?
What is bureaucracy? Who is qualified to answer this? I mean, happily, I've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12, but I bet Sheila will be diving straight into this.
Should NHS England have an independent body to make independent decisions separately to government, or should government be able to tell them what to do?
Look at Eleanor's face.
No, come on, Eleanor.
That's so not a topic, mate. That's the difference between a news story and a topic. I think you've been at LBC long enough now to have this course.
Okay, let's try again. Let's try again. One more time. Read you. Okay. NHS England, should they have the power to make decisions over the NHS, or should the government be able to tell them what to do?
Well, no, because now I say to you, what a caller's going to say. Give me the best caller you're going to get if you ask that question.
I don't know. This is your job.
This is exactly. I'm just for an hour. See, I'm just pointing out that it's not as easy as some of us make it look.
It's really not.
Because it is really huge. It is really important, but who knows how important it is? So I might come on air tomorrow and say, how important is this?
Sure. I think the worry is another top-down reorganisation from the NHS. This is something that the government, the Labour Party, promised not to do in the run-up to the election campaign. They, attacked the Lansley reviews no end, said it was a complete waste of time, but now they are doing a complete reorganisation of the NHS. They say it's going to save money. Can we guarantee that there aren't going to be huge job cuts? This is exactly why, Amanda Pritchard, the boss of NHS England, clearly left a few weeks ago because she was unhappy with this plan, though, it seems like she wouldn't have had a job anyway. So
yeah, you're right, of course. You can join the dots in reverse, can't you, and see why that happened, because it was unexpected at the time, but now makes perfect sense. Natasha Clark, thank you. It is 11:41. This is very poignant from Patrick. Talking about that last call we took from John, describing how he sort of came up with his own code-breaking method of reading as a way of coping with undiagnosed dyslexia. Patrick says, wow, this engineer guy is describing me. I'm good with numbers, terrible with words. I use a pattern system to remember words as well, and I still beat myself up for not completing my degree. I feel stupid and ashamed at times. And that is why Jamie Oliver has embarked upon this campaign, because you shouldn't, mate. And I don't know. I'll get an answer to what you do as an adult, a late diagnosis, an adult diagnosis, how you get it, where you go, when I can. It is 11:41, and Anna is in Weston-super-Mare. Anna, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 30, went through school avoiding and hiding.
What does that mean, Anna? Tell me what that means, avoiding and hiding. I mean, I'm not stupid, I have a fair idea what the words mean, but what would it mean in reality in your school day?
In reality, I have a real clear memory in primary school of hiding under the piano stool. We used to sit on a mat, and I used to hide. I used to avoid. If I had to read things out, I would stammer. I would get nervous. I couldn't read the words, and then people laughed, and then I got more anxious. Yeah. And when I went through school, I did manage to scrape 5 GCSEs, because I had to get 5 GCSEs to get to equestrian college, which is all I wanted to do was horses.
Yes.
But yeah, I just found everything very difficult. My parents, used to say, well, you never tried, and you were quite lazy at school, which I suppose that's how it presented. But I just genuinely, things just didn't make sense. Words didn't make sense. Numbers also. I'm very jealous of people who are really good with numbers, because I'm not really good with either. But I left school. I ran my own equestrian business for quite a few years, and then I joined the fire service. And it was actually going for promotion exams and tests, where I suddenly realised that there was things I couldn't do. I had to process information. I had to read about people and then put them into jobs. And I read about the person and read about the job, and then go back and read about the person. And I just couldn't, as soon as I read about the job, I'd forget the person, and vice versa. It's almost like, if you imagine like Guess Who, when you look at the card and you turn it back over and it's gone.
And you can't remember what was on it before.
Couldn't remember it. Couldn't remember the information. And I sat there, and everybody else has finished, and I'm there.
You'd be rubbish at patience, wouldn't you?
I would be, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I couldn't do it, and I felt stupid, and I had to wait another year. And then they said about, dyslexia, and I was like, really, I didn't want to kind of go, I failed because I think I'm dyslexic. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna, and I got tested, and it was really, other callers have said, it was really liberating to sort of know that actually I'm not stupid, and there are things that I find difficult, and I've got coping strategies and I think also they do say the later in life you get diagnosed, maybe the more intelligent you are because you learn to mask it.
Right.
So I'm taking that one.
I can't let that pass completely because it puts people in an unpleasant situation if they've been diagnosed when they were young. I mean, things have got a lot better since you were at school.
They have, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nowadays, there's a lot more awareness of it.
The Army as well, I'm hearing. The Fire Service and the Army will adjust for dyslexia. They're both. I've had a couple of messages. I think Dell was in touch to tell me that the Army was where he A, got diagnosed, and B, got given the skills he needed to move on. So liberating is an interesting word. So it silences that self-criticism, does it? It silences your stupid voice.
And also, it makes you, I understand that there are things I find very difficult and challenging, but there are things that I excel at. I mean, I run a successful property business. I'm a middle manager in the fire service now. I've done really well in life, despite not being academic. I've presented to senior leadership courses, and I mix with like senior leaders and CEOs who have got PhDs, and I'm an ideas person. I surround myself with people that like the theory, that are good at project management, and then fill in the gaps.
Do you still struggle with words, or have you had special training?
I do, yeah. So I've just.
But you know why?
To work.
Yeah, but you know why, and you know it doesn't speak to any bigger conclusion about your overall intelligence, which means your confidence gets an enormous boost. That's why the word liberating keeps popping up. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:49. Do you remember when they used to do personal announcements on the radio? Like, you'd be listening to the BBC and it would say, would Keith Jones please get in touch with his wife? Do you remember? It happened very, very, very rarely. There'd be some sort of massive emergency. Do you remember? I'm just showing my age, aren't I? Anyway, I'm doing one now for Sean in concert. Sean's been in touch about the news story that you've been hearing more of regarding Keir Starmer announcing the abolition of NHS England. Sean, mate, you've got the wrong end of the stick. Sean's messaged me to say, Starmer has lost his mind. Get rid of the royal family, not the NHS. It's mad, mate. 300 million a year to keep them. Please read this out, Sean. He's not abolished the NHS. He's just abolished the sort of management structure that was only put in place 13 years ago. So relax. Seriously, this is a special announcement for Sean in concert. Keir Starmer is not abolishing the NHS. Of course, joking about matters health-related assumes a rather different timbre when you turn your attention to events on the other side of the Atlantic. I recommended to you yesterday an article in The Atlantic, appropriately enough, the magazine The Atlantic, about a journalist who tracked down the family of a 6-year-old girl who died of measles as a consequence of widespread failure and growing reluctance to be vaccinated, something that grew up, of course, as a consequence of misinformation and lies during the COVID crisis, but it has now extended and expanded to other conditions as well, other conditions for which you can be vaccinated. And it's getting pretty serious, I think, because Donald Trump made the man whose voice you're about to hear his Secretary of State for Health, the sort of most senior health concerned politician in the United States, is Robert Kennedy, who has given an interview to Fox News in which he talked about measles.
The government shouldn't force them to do it. There are adverse events from the vaccine. It does cause deaths every year. It causes all the illnesses that measles itself causes, encephalitis and blindness, etc. And so people ought to be able to make that choice for themselves. And what we need to do is give them the best information and encourage them to vaccinate. The vaccine does stop the spread of the disease.
And as part of my probably doomed attempt to try and stay across as much of the madness that's unfolding under Donald Trump as possible, I'm joined now by Adam Ratner, who's a paediatric infectious diseases physician in New York City and the author of the book Booster Shots, The Urgent Lessons of Measles and the Uncertain Future of Children's Health. I bet you never thought you'd hear that from a senior politician in a US administration, Adam.
No, it is disappointing, disheartening, and frankly, frightening.
And how serious is it? How dangerous are these words?
You know, I think that, first of all, I'll say that the things that you heard Mr. Kennedy say are false. The measles vaccine does not kill people every year or at all. The measles vaccine does not cause the things that he listed, like encephalitis and death. Measles does cause those things, which we are seeing in West Texas and New Mexico and Oklahoma right now. And I think that he is now in a position where he's not just a fringe anti-vaccine activist. He is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He has enormous power to dictate what our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and our National Institutes of Health do and what they are allowed to say.
How do you expect this outbreak in West Texas and beyond to develop? What does measles do in these kind of contexts when herd immunity has been compromised in this way?
Right. So measles is our most contagious disease. It is more contagious than flu or COVID or polio or Ebola or anything else you can think of. And when measles gets into a population that does not have sufficient immunity, it spreads until it runs out of people to spread to. And so until it meets a wall of either immunity, people who have had measles before or are vaccinated against measles, or everyone is infected. And so West Texas itself is not the most densely populated part of the United States. And so there is a limit to how many people can be infected there, although the limit is very high.
Right.
The vaccination rate in that area we look at kindergarten entry vaccination, so kids who are about 5 years old, having received the measles, mumps, rubella shot as our sort of surrogate for population vaccination. Nationwide in the U.S., it is about 93%, which is too low. That is lower than we would like it. In Gaines County, Texas, where the outbreak is centered, it's about 80%, and that is much, much too low to contain an outbreak.
Do we know why it's so low?
It's complicated. There are a couple of factors that go into specific communities having markedly lower vaccination rates than the rest of the country. We had an outbreak in New York City before the COVID pandemic where we had 650 people who were infected, and it was concentrated mainly in a cloistered religious community that the anti-vaccine movement had targeted directly. There was, culturally targeted messaging to that Orthodox Jewish community. What we're seeing in Gaines County has some similarities to that in that the outbreak started in a Mennonite community that has a very low rate of vaccination. There is nothing in that religion or in Orthodox Judaism or really in any religion that prohibits vaccination, but there also are very clearly messages from church leaders and from other folks saying that parents should not vaccinate their kids.
I mean, one hesitates to know what question to ask about that, but what do you understand the anti-vaccine movement to be? I think clerics have often harnessed ignorance and power alongside each other to boost their own position. So that's perhaps less mysterious. But this rather modern phenomenon of the anti-vaccine movement, what is it exactly?
I think it's a couple of things. And I want to, first of all, I want to separate out the people who are the leaders of this movement and the people who are the parents who may be spreading information and are involved in this movement. Anti-vaccine parents and parents who hesitate about vaccines and have questions, these are people who love their children. These are not people who want harm to come to kids. They are doing their best. They're being lied to, and they are believing those lies. And often they're sharing that information on social media, but they're doing so because they think that the information they're sharing is important and is true. And so there's an information problem there. Then there are the leaders of the anti-vaccine movement. I count Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as one of these who are, some of it is that it's a grift. They're making a tremendous amount of money from this and gaining power and gaining notoriety. And I think that is seductive for people. Some of them may actually believe what they're saying. And I think that some of that comes from this move in the United States and elsewhere. There's this devaluing of expertise, yes. This idea that everyone is entitled to their own set of facts, which is not true. And it's a dangerous combination.
I don't know whether it's fair to tempt you outside your own field of expertise, but why do you think Trump would appoint an anti-vaxxer to such a senior position?
It's mind-boggling to me because if you just look at it from a practical point of view for him, Trump in his first term supported Operation Warp Speed. He got us COVID vaccines, in a fast way. It wasn't entirely him. He had his hesitations about it. But I think in an alternate universe, you might have a president who took credit for that and said, yes, this is something that I did, and doubled down on being someone who used vaccines to promote health. I think that Trump is so intent on tearing down the existing structures in any way that he can. And RFK is a bully, and he is someone who very much wants to tear down the CDC and the NIH and people who have spent their lives trying to protect the population, protect children specifically from infectious diseases. These are the people who RFK wants to fire.
How scared are you?
I mean, I think that I am frightened for our country for a vast number of reasons.
Of course, but in your particular purview, I mean.
Right. So among those, I'm very worried about the health of children in the United States. Like, we have made so much progress in the last century worldwide, not just in the U.S., but when you look back a century ago, children would die of diphtheria, they would die of polio, they would die of measles. That doesn't happen anymore, except now in West Texas, where a child has died of measles, and there are others who are extremely sick. And there was reporting from CNN yesterday that there are both pregnant women and young infants who are infected and are in the hospital. Like, this is going back in time, and not in a good way. Yeah. This is not, making anything great again.
Nicely done. Thank you, Adam Ratner, the author of Booster Shots, The Urgent Lessons of Measles and the Uncertain Future of Children's Health, and a paediatric infectious diseases physician in New York City. You know what's next? It's Mystery Hour. It's Thursday. It's 12 o'clock. We've almost brought it in on time. Brilliant guest. Part of this ongoing process that we're going to have, albeit from the wrong side or the other side of the Atlantic, to try to bring expertise, facts. That's a great line, isn't it? You don't get to choose your own set of quotes, facts, end quotes. There is only one. In the words of Highlander, there can be only one. But Mystery Hour, a bit of an exception to all the other rules of the programme, and you'll find out why if you haven't listened to it before after this. In a nutshell, people ring in with a question. It could, of course, be you, and then other people ring in with an answer, which could also, of course, be you. The number remains the same.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I think we'll come back to that dyslexia conversation at some point. Maybe get Jamie into the studio, actually, and Keith will be excited. I think are you an even bigger Jamie Oliver fanboy than I am? It's pretty close, isn't it, I think? Because people like Pamela getting in touch to tell me they were diagnosed as dyslexic at the age of 65 when they were doing an OU degree. Some of the lessons you learn about not having been stupid all your life are just making me cry, actually. Incredibly moving. But it is now time for Mystery Hour, your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial. So a who, a why, a when, a where, a whither, even perhaps the occasional wherefore. You get in touch with your question and someone else will hopefully be able to provide the answer. That's it, really, except to say that my favourite contribution of the week will win, wait for it, a Mystery Hour board game. An actual board, a real-life board game. which brings all the fun of Mystery Hour into your sitting room or your kitchen or wherever it is that you like to play board games. I played a couple of other great games last weekend, actually. I must tell you about them. If you like me, like games that encourage everyone to play together and the family to put the phones away and stuff like that. I've got a couple of other ones that were great fun. And what's the other bit? Oh, yeah, the full terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk because it's a proper grown-up competition, that. And you can buy the board game. It's not just a prize. That would be weird. You can actually buy it in all decent... Well, just go to mysteryhour.co.uk to find out more about it. And that's it, really. I often give you a... guarantee of one laugh out loud moment. That's been working pretty well lately. Some of you are kind enough to suggest that you have at least one laugh out loud moment pretty much every hour of the programme that we do together. But that's it really. And you'll know more than you do now by the time 1 o'clock comes round, albeit that it could well prove to be knowledge that you've forgotten by 1:15 and that you wasn't particularly valuable knowledge in the first place. Quantity, not quality. Quantity, not quality of knowledge. Sorry, I just snorted at my own joke. Just get on with the show, quick. This is getting embarrassing. Steve's in Bethnal Green. Steve, question or answer?
Hello, James. Question, please.
Thank you, Steve. Carry on.
I'd like to know when pubs introduced bells to call time and last orders.
Oh, I like that. Well, you know how much I love my job, Steve. More than one person has worked out what pub in Romilly I would have been in when I encountered the bloke whose Alsatian had eaten his false teeth and who carried a copy of The Sun around. And I think they're right. I think it was indeed the Friendship Inn in Romilly. Yes. So when did
Good
the bell?
Name.
It is a great name for a pub and appropriate given the story that I was just sharing a moment ago. I like that. I like that a lot. When did the bell get introduced? And why, perhaps? I mean, you know why, but when? When was the bell? The last orders for the bell in the pub. Thank you, Steve. 12:07 is the time. Nick's in Woodford. Nick, question or answer?
It's the question, James.
Carry on, Nick.
Well, this is exciting because I actually asked the form of this question years ago to you. I had my young kids in the car at the time, and you burst my bubble by answering it. And
why did I burst your bubble? It's good to answer it.
Well, I suppose, but my kids were in the car, and I was like, "Oh, he's answered it."
You mean you wanted it? You wanted it to go on the board and
yeah,
okay.
Well, look, to be honest, it was a good answer from you, but obviously you can't ask two questions in one go. So I waited years for this.
How many years?
I think, well, they were quite young. So
are they married now? Are they married? Have they made you a granddad? Have they?
They're just moody and moody teenagers.
Oh, that's
age. What they are now.
That age, are they?
They were quite cute in the back of the car before.
Yes.
It's about 6-7 years. I think it made the board game as well, but I'm not sure. But the question is, if assuming we wash our dishes and our clothes, hotter temperatures is better for stain removal and whatnot. Would it not make more sense then to brush our teeth with hotter water?
So does warm water, is it better to brush your teeth with warm water?
Exactly.
What was your question years and years ago? Was it about why we don't brush our teeth with warm water?
Exactly.
And did I mention rats? Did I talk about rats? Yes. It's not really true anymore because most of us have got combi boilers, haven't we? And the hot water's not kept in a separate tank in the loft. So I think I know the answer to this, but you've obviously spiked my guns by dragging up your years old sadness about me answering it last time. So I shall leave it on the board. Does brushing your teeth with warm water, is it more effective than brushing your teeth with cold water? When you tell the kids, they're going to be a lot less excited than they were last time, aren't they?
I think so.
8 minutes after 12 is the time. Adrian, it says here, Adrian is at the Jamaican Patty Company in Covent Garden. That's possibly the most specific location that we've had on Mystery Hour in a very long time, Adrian. Are you just in the queue or are you working?
I'm working.
We walk past you every day. I know exactly where you are.
Well, why don't you come in and introduce yourself?
I shall do. Next time I'm walking past, I'll come to you for a patty and then I'll go over the road for one of those nice Portuguese custard tarts.
Fantastic.
What's your question?
What happened to the rest of Downing Street?
What do you mean?
There's number 10, number 11,
yes,
but there's no number 1 to 9.
This is true. I think there might. I think there is, isn't there? Have you ever been there?
I think so.
Have you ever been there?
Yeah.
And you can see 10 and 11. you can't exactly stroll up it of an evening, can you? But where is the rest of Downing Street? So, all right, that's a good question. How's business?
It's quiet at the moment.
Is it?
It's still early.
What is the difference between a Jamaican patty and other forms of patty or pasty or pastry-based snack?
Well, Cornish pasties are one flavour only. Jamaican patties vary, so you can have all different fillings.
What's your favourite? What's your most popular?
Jerk chicken, curry goat or spicy beef are the best sellers.
Yeah.
My favourite is ackee and saltfish, but I'm a fish lover.
Fair enough. And what's it like? Describe it to me.
What's the fish one?
Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible. It's with ackee, which is very soft in taste and texture, which marries well with the really strong flavour of the salted cod.
Ooh. Yeah, you wouldn't think of a fish patty, would you, or a fish pasty? But Eleanor's a vegetarian. Well, she's a pescatarian, so she might be popping in as well for one of those. Thank you, Adrian. I shall do my best to get you an answer. What happened to the rest of Downing Street? 10 minutes after 12 is the time. Joe is in Brighton. Joe, question or answer?
It's a question for you, James.
Carry on.
Do we eat soup or do we drink soup?
It depends whether you're using a spoon or not, surely.
Really?
Well, if you're drinking it out of a mug, then you are drinking it. But if you are eating it out of a bowl with a spoon, then you are eating it.
It doesn't depend what type of soup it is. I mean, if it's like a lobster bisque, do you drink it? Or
Get you? You mean like an unlumpy one, a completely smooth soup?
Yeah, or like a really heavy kind of Californian clam chowder.
Or like a cauliflower and blue cheese I'm quite partial to, with quite big chunks of cauliflower in. Or a minestrone, which is pretty close to a plate of pasta, isn't it? You know, especially... okay. Why are you asking?
Because I have a foreign student, a German student, staying with me at the moment, and I'm preparing him his lunch. I teach him lessons in the morning, and he asked me what we were having for lunch today, and I said soup, which my partner's made for him. A rather nice kind of chicken broth, actually, that she cooked up a couple of days ago. And he said, do you eat soup or do you drink soup?
What do Germans do? What word do they use?
They eat it.
Do they?
Apparently, yeah.
They don't ever drink it, even if it's a cup of soup?
Even if it's a cup of soup.
What's German for cup of soup? What's German for cup of soup?
I don't know. Should I ask him?
Yeah, is he there?
He is, yeah.
Go on.
Konstantin, what's German for cup of soup? Cup of soup.
Are you telling me or are you repeating it?
He's just said it's a cup of soup.
Yeah, but cup of soup. It's cup of soup, not cup of soup. Cup of soup.
Yeah,
cup of soup.
It's
okay, I'll find out for you. And that's what an added bonus that is for a student who's staying in Brighton to get onto Mystery Hour as well. I tell him it's the single most exciting thing that can happen on UK radio. He's got no way of checking. 30 minutes after 12 is the time. Cup of soup. Do you eat it or drink it? I think I was right, but I'm feeling modest today, so I'm not taking a round of applause for that, or indeed for the answer that I could have given to Nick. I like Adrian's question. I've just got a feeling that we've been there before. What happened to the rest of Downing Street? And Steve's, I think, is box fresh. When did we start ringing bells in pubs to signify last orders? Michelle's in Orpington. Michelle, question or answer?
It's a question, please.
Carry on, Michelle.
It's something I've wondered for such a long time.
How long?
Okay.
How long?
Why is a top hat called a top hat? Because everybody tells me it's on the top of your head.
Yeah.
But
so are all
hats
hats.
are on the top of. So why is a top hat called a top hat?
A top hat? Let's have a think. Yeah? No, it's a good one.
I've wondered this.
Have you ever worn one?
I have, yes.
Because it sits differently from other hats. So I wear hats a lot. And if you're wearing a flat cap, you might wear it at a jaunty angle. Even if you were wearing a bowler hat, you would wear it you might wear it at a slight bias. But with a top hat, you have to wear it absolutely plumb on the top of your head. So it could be that, you know.
Unless you're like the Cat in the Hat, and he's got a jaunty top hat angle.
He has, but he is also a cat.
This is true.
So I don't know how much of a guide we should take from. So, but yeah, I mean, you always wear a hat on your head. So why is a top hat a top hat? Well, I mean, you could equally say, why is a bowler hat called a bowler hat? But you didn't. You said, why is a top hat? Why is a top hat called a top hat?
Don't confuse me.
I'll try and find
I wouldn't know that now.
No, that you can ring in next week. I'll try and find out for you. Why is a top hat called a top hat? Thank you, Michelle. It is 12:15. Well, I'm trying to think when I wore a top hat. So you never bother renting one, do you? When you're going to... Oh, you do if you're the groom or the usher. We didn't do that. But that must be the last time I had a top hat, when I rented a whistle to be an usher at a friend's wedding. The full kit and caboodle. I went to a wedding once, some very posh friends of mine. It's a stately home. Family home was a stately home, would you believe? And I'm not like one of the lost Mitchell brothers. I went to public school, but I said, I did just say whistle. That's true. I said, is it compulsory, the morning suit, or is it just for the groom and the ushers? And she said, oh no, don't worry. You just wear what you want. And so I did. I went in a normal suit, and I was literally the only man there not in tails. So I spent a significant amount of time, whenever I went to the lavatory, being given drinks orders at this wedding, even though I was actually a guest. I sat next to a bloke who went on to become an earl, would you believe, at the same wedding. It was a nice suit. It wasn't one of my River Island specials. It was Paul Smith, I think. But still, I don't know why that sticks with me. 12:16 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is quite important from Kieran, actually. I don't know. Does this constitute an apology? Do you think we need to get in ahead of this for the Ofcom complaint, Keith? Kieran says, great show, James. If you're going to submit a complaint, that is the best way to start. Sorry to be a pedant, but Slash does not wear his top hat plumb on the top of his head. It goes all over the place. Kind regards, Kieran. You're absolutely right. Sorry. James is in Dublin. James, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on, James.
No better man have I got. James,
yes, James.
If I could hypothetically cut a horse in half from the middle, would a top racehorse trainer or breeder know if it was a boy or a girl? Because I see them at Cheltenham and she'll say, what a beauty, she looks gorgeous. And would it be possible?
From the front half?
Yes.
So you've only got the front half of a horse?
Yes.
Would you be able to tell whether it was a mare or a stallion?
Exactly. Now, let's presume that horse is walking, but you couldn't see the back half.
Yes.
Well, that's another question, so sorry.
No, that's all right. I mean, I don't know if you need to chop the horse in half. You could just have a stable door, for example.
Oh, no, James, you've got the vital bits at the back now.
No, I know, but a stable, you know how a stable door works, James?
No, but you've got to see...
So he's got his head, he's in a stable.
The girl's legs or the boy's legs.
Oh, you think you'd need to see the legs as well?
Well, it would help if you were a male or female. You would know if he's all hairy, wouldn't you?
But we're being a bit anthropomorphic now, James. That's the human legs that you're talking about. I think female and male...
The horse might have a different...
I don't think male horses have hairier legs. I don't think they have hairier legs than...
Actually, it's just if it's a boy or a girl. Let's not go... I shouldn't have said hairs on legs.
No, I think that was a distraction from the central question.
It was your fault. You got me there.
I know. I'm sorry. Okay. So, because you understand why I mentioned stable doors, because you would be able not to see the back of the horse if it was just poking its head out of the top half of a stable.
The horse could be a drag artist, couldn't it? He could have makeup and all. Don't be done. All right. The first half.
It's on. So, would an expert be able to tell whether a horse was male or female if it could only see the front half of the horse?
Yes, and even our greatest trainer in the world,
Vincent O'Brien.
Would he know?
Vincent O'Brien, no relation.
Yes.
Would he know?
It wouldn't be Vincent. God love him.
God rest his soul. No, we shall find out. Thank you, James. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Would an expert equinologist be able to identify whether a horse was a male or a female of the species, with access only to the front half of the horse, including legs? So, I mean, you could put it in a kind of like a cloak. You could cloak the back, because I think the image of a horse being cut in half is quite potentially quite traumatic. Thank you, James. Andy's in Kingston upon Hull. Andy, question or answer?
Question, buddy, please.
Carry on.
So, I live in, as you give us our posh name, Kingston upon Hull.
All right.
However, everybody knows it as Hull.
They do.
So why is it not known as Kingston?
What?
So I'll give you an example. Stoke-on-Trent is Stoke.
It is.
Newcastle on Tyne is Newcastle, but up here in Hull, we are just known as Hull.
It is just Hull.
Oh, so why is it not Kingston?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm trying to think of another example of some. Kingston upon Thames is known as Kingston. That's a better example, actually, isn't it? Because that's Kingston.
But so in that situation, that would be Thames, wouldn't it?
That's what I'm saying. That's a better, because that. I mean, is Hull a river? It's not.
There's a river Hull. There's the Humber Estuary, and there's a river Hull. Yeah. So Kingston is upon the river Hull, but
that's where it comes from. It's definitely the river Hull, because everyone just thinks of the Humber.
Yeah, the Humber's the estuary, and then we've got the river running off that is the River Hull.
Okay, runs through Beverley, does it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, runs all the way up. Yeah.
So why is it called Kingston? Why is it called Hull and not Kingston?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, why is it Hull?
It's a great question,
as we call it, and not Kingston.
It's a great question. Did you know my late father was on the Hull Daily Mail for quite a spell?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, we don't. Yeah, we don't mention that paper in Hull, mate. So
why not?
You probably like the Kingston upon Hull newspaper now. It's right up your street, mate. You'd have some fun reading some of the stuff that goes on there.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's not there anymore. Okay, you're on. Why is it Kingston upon Hull? Why is it Hull, not Kingston? I like that question. There's a few Kingstons around, I think. I mean, is it because we've already got a Kingston upon Thames? But then why mention Kingston at all? It's Kingston. It's the King's town upon the River Hull. So why has it become known as Hull? That's a brilliant question. I mean, to be honest, I'd have thought that everyone in Hull would know the answer, Andy.
Oh, don't say that, man, because I might be the only one who doesn't.
We'll soon find out. 24 minutes after 12, Ian is in King's Lynn, which is oddly enough known to locals as Lynn. Ian, question or answer? Not as Kings.
I have a question, James. Good afternoon.
Carry on. Good afternoon.
On an aircraft manifesto, why do they say souls on board rather than passengers on board?
Did they say souls on board?
Yeah.
I've never seen an aircraft manifesto.
The plane that went down on the Hudson,
yeah.
When they were talking about the passengers, it said, how many souls on board? And that's my query. I don't understand why.
Nor do I. I mean, that's the only example of it you've got, or do we know for a fact that it is in common parlance?
There are more, but I can't think of any.
No, that's fine. I'm not putting pressure on you. I don't expect you to. I just you're confident that it isn't just a script writer being a bit poetic or something like that.
No, it's definitely.
So souls on a plane is what we're talking about. Souls on board.
Absolutely. Why is it souls on a plane and not people on a plane?
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Could it mean alive?
That's my theory, but I don't know.
Of course it is. Of course it is your theory. Come on. Is it really your theory? Because I bet it's going to be that, isn't it? Souls on board would mean how many people alive do you think? I don't know. Anyway, so why is it souls on board on a plane, not passengers or indeed people? Why is it Hull, not Kingston upon Hull, when Ian is calling from King's Lynn, which nobody calls Kings, everyone calls it? That doesn't work, does it? Kingston upon Thames is Kingston. Why is Kingston upon Hull? Hull. What was Michelle's question, Keith? Got James's question about the horse, which doesn't bear repetition. Michelle's question about top hats, why are they called that? Joe's question about whether you eat soup or drink it, which I think I've answered. Adrian's question about what happened to the rest of Downing Street. Nick's question about brushing your teeth in warm water and whether it improves the process. And Steve's question about the bell and last orders in a pub. John's in Eltham. John, question or answer?
Answer, please, James.
Carry on, John.
I'd like to answer the question about what happened to the rest of Downing Street.
Marvellous.
Actually, it never actually existed. It was built as a cul-de-sac.
Oh.
By a guy called George Downing.
He was a rascal.
He was a rascal. He made a lot of money at the restoration of Charles II.
Having been quite a prominent parliamentarian under Cromwell, he was one of those people who got ahead of the pack, didn't he? He knew exactly what side his bread was buttered.
He did. He was a very shrewd man, and he proved it.
American, I think. Was he American by birth, or have I imagined that?
No. He was English, but he did have the last plantations in America.
Ah, that was it.
In the New England colonies, not the Beetle colleges. But he got in on the new business, the new idea of business that was just coming in with Charles II's reign, of building houses not just for individual people, but building houses as a speculation.
Okay.
The first man who did it was a guy called Praise God and Praise the Lord Barban.
I love these Puritan names. I think we should try and bring them back, shouldn't we? But I think the question hinges on how can there be a number 10 and not a number 2?
Well, what happened was, at the end of the 19th century, they were combining the two streets that had led into the old Whitehall Palace, which had long burned down.
Yes.
One of which was Whitehall, that we know now, and the other one was a much smaller street called Parliament Street. The two streets were knocked down and built made into one great imperial highway in the late 1860s by Sir Gilbert Scott, who knocked down the upper half of the houses. There were originally 12.
Right.
Knocked down the upper half of the houses in Downing Street, and on the top built what is now the Foreign Office and the Home Office.
That makes perfect sense. And they didn't bother numbering it because presumably number 10 already had a place in the sort of public consciousness.
No. George Downing, to make even more money at the time, had sold, by then he was long dead, but in the 1730s, the land came into the possession, Downing Street came into the possession of George II.
Right.
Who, to show that he was very, au fait and wanted to get on terribly well with the new parliamentary ideas that were coming in, gave the house to Sir Robert Walpole, who became the first secretary to the Treasury, as he was called. But basically, he was the only one in the Cabinet Office who dealt with George II, who could speak German.
So that's why he got the job. There you go. There's a lesson for us all there. Was George Gilbert Scott the father of Giles Gilbert? Is there a dynasty of Gilbert Scotts?
Yes.
Okay.
There was originally Giles Gilbert Scott, who actually more or less rebuilt the outside of Westminster Abbey.
Right.
Because it was falling to pieces. And he knocked down half of Sir Christopher Wren's 1690 work to do it.
And then, to bring it full circle, a later Giles Gilbert Scott designed Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral.
He did indeed.
And I bet you don't know this. I bet you don't know this because I get the sense you know everything. He also designed the Abbey at my old school.
Oh.
I knew you didn't know that, you see?
Oh, well, you didn't know that my father worked for him when he was younger.
Well, you look at that. Does that constitute your qualifications then? What are your qualifications to answer this question?
A vast knowledge of very strange and completely useless things on London, and reading books on London that have been out of print since about 1730.
Oh, what a lovely hobby. That's not useless at all.
I just collect books on London. The earliest I've got is John Strype's book of 1603, which was written when Queen Elizabeth was still alive. And it still has the original bindings and the notes inside. And the first page in it has been written out in an 18th century hand because somebody must have lost the first page of the original book.
So they got hold of another one and substituted their own handwritten page front page. That's a lovely thing to own, isn't it? There's so many stories before you even start reading it.
It is astonishing. Every time you pick it up, the first thing I do is just sniff it.
Yes, I bet.
Because of the smell. It's just unbelievable. And just think, you're holding in your hands something that someone could have held in their hands and seen Elizabeth I.
Good grief. You just are, aren't you?
It is. It's a direct, tactile
link
contact.
to the past,
there is nothing
the distant past.
genuinely nothing else like it.
No.
Because when you read the words that are going into your eyes, the words that were going into their eyes. If that doesn't sound as if I ought to be carted off in a little padded yellow van somewhere.
You're a poet, John, I think. You really are. And actually, on the subject of great writers, I think Downing at one point was... Did Samuel Pepys work for George Downing at one point?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, there it is.
Yes, Downing, he got a clerkship, Clerk of the Acts, as it was called, from George Downing, because Downing needed basically someone to do all the boring paperwork he didn't want to do. And Pepys lived in a little courtyard, which is long disappeared, which is now was on the site of where now is Parliament Fields, outside Westminster. It was called Axe Yard.
Right.
And he moved there in the early 1630s when he married Elizabeth Pepys. And that's when they both started rowing with each other.
I was going to say the long-suffering Elizabeth Pepys, John. The long-suffering Elizabeth Pepys.
The very long-suffering.
I got a lovely message off Ollie. He said, let me get this right, I would love to go on the completely useless tour of London with this guy.
He's very kind.
John, thank you. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. I could listen to you all day, actually. 12:33 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:36. Great show as always. A lot of love for John coming in, as you'd expect. But Mark in Oakham takes it a little further than many messages, saying the next time you go on holiday, could you get him to fill in for you? That was an amazing answer, and the subsequent conversation made me stop working. It's not quite up there with burning toast, but yes, he was. I mean, what a fascinating man. I love all that stuff as well. Unlike John, I don't go to the original sources yet, although I think I'm probably going to be tempted to now that he's made such a case for doing so. I read a lot of historical fiction set in that era. And we were at the Guildhall the other night when LBC won that big quiz against all the other news organisations in the country. It took place in the Guildhall, smack in the middle of City of London. If you ever come to town, if you're not local, if you're not from London, if that is probably a bit off the beaten track actually, to get into the City and Fleet Street and all around there. I mean, it's a short hop from Westminster and Whitehall, where you would expect to find yourself on the tourist trail. But I've got a real soft spot. I've told you this before. A real soft spot for views that probably haven't changed in hundreds of years. If you can, just squint a bit and take maybe a lamppost out of the picture, the actual view, the buildings would not have changed at all. And that doesn't work on Downing Street, as John has just explained to us, because the Victorians redeveloped it and knocked bits down and merged streets. But if you head down into the Inns of Court, some of the areas just off Fleet Street, if you go down the alleyway down the side of the Cheshire Cheese pub, which is itself worth visiting, I don't know why, I find all of that lovely. A bit like the Shambles in York and parts of Edinburgh as well, where you just really feel that the history is close by, but not as close by as John made it feel when he described sniffing a book that could have been in the hands of somebody who witnessed the coronation or the procession, the reign of Elizabeth I. That's mad. I love all that stuff. 12:38 is the time. Darren is in Hoddesdon. Question or answer, Darren?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on,
afternoon.
Darren. Good afternoon.
Yes, it was about the souls on board when we talk about the aircraft manifest.
Yes.
And it's just a way we describe the number of living humans on the airplane.
I thought so.
Because we may well have human remains being carried in the aircraft as well. So that's what air traffic control want to know, and on the paperwork that we have to leave behind before we depart. So,
qualifications?
I'm an airline captain.
Well done. Where are you off to next?
Somewhere in Europe, I should imagine. Maybe actually Egypt, I think, in a couple of weeks' time.
When do you find out your next destination, for sure?
Well, it's on the roster at the moment. That's the plan.
Oh, you just haven't checked. You just forgot for a bit. Okay, I see. You don't just turn up at the airport.
Ahead.
Don't just turn up at the airport.
No, about a month in advance.
Okay, cool. Do you enjoy your work?
I love it, yeah. That's what I'd always wanted to do while I was at school. So, it's a fairly long road, and nowadays a very expensive road to get there. But
it is.
Yes.
Love it. Have a round of applause on me, Darren.
Thanks, James.
No, well played. And, chocks away. Happy flying. Zena is in Enfield. Zena, question or answer?
Answer, James.
Carry on, Zena.
You cannot tell the difference between a horse if you just had the front half.
How do we know?
It's a lovely question. Because I phoned my daughter as well just to make sure. She's had horses for nearly 30 years.
Okay.
I said, Devon, I don't know, I'm going mad. No, Mum, absolutely, you can't tell the difference. You can get finer horses, your Arabs, your thoroughbreds, your cobs. You can get all different horses, Section A's, and you can't tell unless you see. I have seen a hermaphrodite.
A hermaphrodite horse? Oh, the phone went. Just as she got halfway. God, I mean, if you're going to pick a word to lose the line halfway through, a hermaphrodite horse. I think she was about to say, we have to get her back. I want to know more about the well, I mean, it's a family programme, but I think it would be interesting to find out a little bit more. And also, I haven't given her a round of applause yet. I thought, and not just because Jason sent this in a text, I thought that male horses had more teeth than female horses, but I've probably imagined that. I've probably, or indeed made it up. 12:41 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Still lots of questions. Oh, Zena's back. You were about to say a hermaphrodite horse.
Yes, I saw one once.
Well, you wouldn't forget.
No, the poor horse, everybody was going in, sort of lifting up the front part, going, ooh, and then the bottom part going, ooh, and this poor horse looking at us as if to say, could you leave me alone? It did go on to be a very, very good winning horse at dressage. It was a very nice horse.
Because you dressage, you can put any, you don't have to have, it's not male or female. Some races, it's just colts, isn't it? Or just...
Yes.
Well, you live and learn. I thought that male horses had more teeth than female horses.
I don't think they do. I'm going to make sure with my daughter. I don't think they... I've never known in all these 30-odd years you could look at a horse and know unless you look underneath.
Unless you have a little look up the back.
And it would be really hard, anyway, to open the mouth. You'd have to have the dentist to have... Unless you're really good with opening mouths of horses all the time.
Like a horse
to count the teeth.
Yes.
No,
yeah,
maybe.
I mean, qualifications?
My daughter's had horses for 30 years.
There you go. I mean, that's brilliant. I love this. I mean, I don't know. I didn't.
Good question, though.
It was a good question, but between you and me, Zena, do you think James was real?
Who?
The fella who asked the question.
Yes, I do. But he was Irish, and the Irish usually are very, 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 very good with horses.
This is true. I don't know. I just felt there was maybe a little touch of the old parody to the call. I could have. Perhaps I'm doing him a grave disservice, perhaps.
Yeah, no, the Irish are very knowledgeable. I can see him wondering that, but it was quite a good question.
It was a very good question.
It was a good question.
Jamie's got a question for you, which you have heard, I would estimate, 467,000 times before in your life.
Yeah.
He wants to know if you're a warrior princess.
Absolutely not. Please do not. It's the Z, not the X. Please.
Round of applause for Zena with a Z. Zena with a Z. Thank you very much. Not with an X, James, you child. Pam's in Cheshire in Hertfordshire. Pam, question or answer?
Question.
Qualifications. What do you mean qualifications? I mean, what's the question? Sorry, I got a bit distracted there. What's the question, Pam? I like the way you stayed silent, waiting for me to realise my mistake, rather than filling the space that was growing uncomfortably between us. What is your question?
I was just gobsmacked, James.
Go on, Pam.
Fitted sheets for bed. Why don't they have labels saying which is the top and which is the bottom?
Fitted sheets.
Have you not tried putting a fitted sheet on a bed?
Of course I have.
Where you wrestle the sheet.
But you can tell by the seam on the inside. It's got a rougher seam.
No, you can't.
Yes, you can. You didn't grow up in Cheshire, did you, Pam?
No.
Where did you grow up?
Wolverhampton.
I knew it, you see. You can tell by the seam. It's got a smooth seam on the top bit and a
No, but you can't. You can't tell that way. You can't.
What do you mean by top and bottom? The top is the bit that you lie on.
No.
Oh, you mean? No, sorry. So you mean the long side and the and the top and the bottom?
Yeah, and
right.
when you come to put the sheet on, then is it this way? Is it because you?
Yeah, because you get it wrong first time, don't you? Every single time.
I've just done it. It was driving me nuts.
Because you can't get it the first. Well, I mean, but a label would look weird.
No, it's on the inside. No, it wouldn't. You have a label on your T-shirt, and that's on the inside.
Well, but you've got a label on your fitted sheet as well with the washing instructions on it.
Yeah, but so it isn't automatically on the top or on the bottom.
Yeah, but how many fitted sheets have you got?
Loads.
Really?
I had once upon a time I had a real thing about bed linen.
Did you?
Yeah.
Are you all right now?
Yeah. No, I've given up on the bed linen.
Okay. What is it these days?
I don't think I've got a real fetish these days. But there was a time I couldn't walk into Marks and Spencer's
without buying a fitted sheet.
Without going straight to the bed linen.
Are there not support groups or anything for people like you? Fitted Sheets Anonymous? Are they not?
Perhaps I should start one.
It might be lonely, Pam. It might be lonely.
I don't think so.
If you have a memory of where the I mean, if you've got so many, this isn't going to work. But a lot of people have probably only got two. And if you know where the washing label is, then you'd be able to remember where the top and where the bottom is in relation to where the washing instructions are.
Yeah, that is possible. But why don't they put the label on in the first place?
I don't know that I'm going to get you an answer to this, but I have enjoyed talking to you enormously.
That's good.
You take care, Pam. We'll talk again. But it's on the board. Why don't they put labels on fitted sheets so that you know whether it's the head of the bed or the side of the bed? How big is a king size? I mean, are any beds square?
No.
Are you sure? I've got a really big bed, Pam.
Somewhere.
I've got a really big bed. It's so big sometimes I reach out in the night and I think Mrs. O'Brien's already got up and she hasn't. That's how big our bed is. But I don't think it's quite square, is it? You're still going to have a longer, like a rectangle with the longer bits there. Yeah, you're on. Let's find out. Fitted sheets, 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time, and I particularly Marion and Roger, I share your interest and your desire to hear more from John, but I mean, unless the best way to hear more from John would be to ring in with more questions about historic London, particularly maybe architectural or to do with the 17th century stuff. If you ring in with the right question, then you're going to hear more from the person who provided the answers. But as things stand, I can't think of a way to sort of carve a different or a specific niche, a bespoke niche for him in the scheduling, in the programmes. So that would be one way. It is 10 to 1, and Hannah is in Evesham. Hannah, question or answer?
Answer.
Go on.
So in regards to the gender of the horse question earlier,
oh yes,
you can, if you are very much clued up and experienced in horses.
So you're throwing quite a lot of shade at Zena and her daughter now.
Yes. It's because I've bred horses for a number of years. I'm also an M&M judge. An
M&M judge?
Yeah, it's a mountain.
How do you judge M&Ms?
Small and light.
What do you do? I mean, just like the colours, or what do you do? Like the peanut ones? What's not? Or is it the rap? Or is it the rap artist? Is it just what's an M&M judge?
Basically, it's mountain and moorland, so it's your Section A's, your Welsh cobs, your Shetland ponies, your New Forest ponies, and small and large breeds. So I've also bred Arabs, thoroughbreds. I used to work on a racehorse stud. I used to work with jockeys and things. So you kind of get to know them.
So you think you could tell the difference, even if you could only see the front half of a horse?
Yes.
How?
Depends on whether you're looking at a stallion, whether you're looking at a gelding, whether you're looking at a mare. It goes in regards to, obviously, with a stallion, you've got a lot of cresty stallions. So the crest is basically the top of their neck, where their mane sits. Predominantly in things like Section A, Section Ds, they've got quite a thicker set crest.
Right.
And the way they arch their neck, and obviously the muscle tone down the shoulders, down the neck itself.
Foolproof, you'd get 100% if you went on You Bet with Stephen Mulhern. Would you be able to identify the sex of 100 horses and you'd get 100 out of 100?
I'd probably go maybe 50, 60.
Well, that's no good. Then you can't. It's not a steward's inquiry, then, is it? Although, appropriately enough, the steward's inquiry in a horse-related question has a beautiful symmetry to it. No, yeah, but you can't. I mean, you can't. You can tell often, but not always.
Majority of the time by their mannerisms as well. So if, figuratively speaking, if you still have the horse that is alive that's chopped in half and it's, gallivanting about and it's acting in a certain way,
it would fall over,
that's
sure.
Definite. Well, that's definitely a stallion because of its attitude. Oh, that's what it is, pins back, that's a mare, and, it's...
No, I like it.
It's just picking up on it and looking at them and getting to know them.
What about the teeth?
They all have the same amount of teeth. It also depends on the breed of horse, the size of their head. For example, my Welsh pony, I'm currently getting a tattoo of her done at the moment.
Oh, really? Well, not currently.
Yeah. I currently am, yeah.
No, you're what, literally?
Literally, yes.
What, you're at the tattoo artist's now?
Yes. Yeah.
You're getting a tattoo live on the radio?
Yes.
Of a horse?
Yeah, I've had her 22 years.
Whereabouts is the tattoo?
It's on my arm.
Well, where's the tattoo artist?
He's just nipped out to give me a little bit of peace so I can talk to you.
And who listens to Miss Jo, him or you?
He does, and I've listened many occasions when I've come in.
Oh, this is lovely. And how long is it going to take to get the... Will you send us a picture of it when it's finished?
If I'm able to, yeah, I'm happy to do so.
Which it's the horse's head, presumably, or is it the whole horse?
Head. It's her head and her neck.
Is it your first tattoo?
No, I've got loads.
Crikey. Well, every day's just... and are all your tattoos your other horses?
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of my horses. Yeah. And I've got other things. Like I've got an entire arm from shoulder to fingers, a tribute to my late father, who actually bought my pony. So, yeah, she was a present from my dad.
A sleeve.
An entire sleeve, yes.
Well, I'm going to give you a round of applause, but honestly, I've never been more wrong before when I've been pedantic with someone who said, I'm getting a tattoo of her at the moment. I said, with absolutely supreme confidence, I said, no, you're not. And yes, you are. I mean, just because I couldn't hear the needle buzzing in the background. Well,
I was told for purposes of the call to be, quiet. So he's given me a little bit of space to...
Well, bring him back. There we go. Have a round of applause, Hannah. What a wonderful call.
He's called in himself before as well.
This is just such we're just one big Mystery Hour family, aren't we? Yeah. That's what we are. Oh, I love it. Thank you, Hannah. It's 12:55. Suzanne's in York. Suzanne, question or answer?
An answer, please.
Go on.
Just about the horses.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Honestly, you wait for... Go on. Are you getting a tattoo at the moment?
I'm not getting a tattoo, no, but I'm sitting looking at my horses out the window.
Oh, that'll do. Carry on.
I've never phoned in before, but you spoke about horses, and
Welcome.
when you do that, questions just go mad.
Yes, you're right.
But just to add to what everybody else has said, the previous lady obviously talking about features and things like that. Yes, you can often tell, but you were also right with the teeth, because mares generally have fewer teeth than male horses. So mares have between 36 and 40 teeth, and the geldings or the stallions between 40 and 44.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't. You wouldn't really be able to count the teeth without quite a lot of hassle.
Well, you could. You'd have to. They're quite a long way back, but you know. They get the dentist every year, and I've seen my horse's teeth. But also male horses quite often have extra canine teeth, which is a throwback from when they were wild horses and for fighting.
Well, you have qualifications?
I've got my own horses and have done for the last 20 years.
Did you have any idea I was so big among the equine community?
No, I didn't, but I do now.
It's extra. It's extra. We could have filled the whole show with horse-related content. Well, have a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. 12:56. Dan's in St. Neots. Question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Dan.
It's why a top hat is called a top hat.
Oh, yes.
There are a few different reasons, and I think they all come together to make the top hat.
Yeah.
First one is because it does go atop your head.
Right.
Second of all, it was called a chimney pot hat.
Yes.
So it's similar to chimney hats.
Yes.
And thirdly, it's because the top hats took up the top shelf in hat shops.
Oh.
So they were the top hats.
Oh, because there's nothing above it.
Nothing above it. No, they were the biggest shells, and they got put at the top. And
Oh,
then
I
other
like
things
that.
got below, yeah.
Oh, I like that. Even if it's not true, it is now. I'm having it. We're going to print the legend. Yes.
you asked about a bowler hat as well.
I did.
I grew up in the village where a bowler hat was invented.
Is it called bowler?
It's not called bowler, no.
What's it called?
Bowler was the guy that made it for Lord Cook on the North Norfolk coast.
It's the Earl of Leicester.
Falcon. That's correct,
And that is, you remember earlier when I said I was at a wedding and I sat next to someone who later became an Earl?
Yes.
It was him. What
kidding.
a show. What an absolutely mad show. This has been one of the best ever. Final question, qualifications, please.
I'm a circus performer, so I wear one most days.
This just gets better and better. So you're the ringmaster?
Ringmaster, juggler, Diablo performer.
What circus?
No particular circus, but
freelance circus performer. Where are you next? Stuff, do you know where you're doing one next?
I'm off to North to do a juggling show. In a place called the Drum Sheds.
Oh, this is fantastic. Have a round of applause on me, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh, crikey. I can't. I'm actually a bit gobsmacked by all the sort of... It felt like the planets were aligning. You've got tattoos, ringmasters, jugglers, horses, John, the historian. What an amazing show. And there you go. Pick a favourite is really, really hard, actually. I don't know if John would want a Mystery Hour board game. I sense it might not be cerebral enough for him. But he was my favourite. Keith, did you hear Keith in my ear then? He said, the rules state it has to be your favourite, dude. All right, then. So it's got to be John. I was tempted to give it to the tattoo artist, currently unnamed, so that they could have it in the waiting room when people are waiting to get a tattoo. They could have a game of the Mystery Hour Booger, but he'll have to ring in himself. You didn't know. You're all right, everybody. I invented this game. I made up all of this stuff, so I don't know quite. Yeah, but how are you lecturing me on what the rules are when I made it all up in the first place? That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show, in 60 minutes every day. It's a lot to choose from today. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.